this is quite a warm climate, so the lettuces don't always do that well in the hotter climates. We also do have some shade houses here as well to protect them through the summer. And what we're trying to do here is create a food forest where we've got our trees going, we've got bananas trees there, citrus trees going, we've got nut trees, avocado trees, pawpaws, as well as guava and coffee. We've got about 350 coffee trees in this space as well, which is about another 3 years to go before they start producing. And then we've got climbing beans all over the place, which we're getting a huge amount of fruit from, plus our loofahs, which we eat when they're still young. And then we've got our pigeon peas as well, plus all our herbs and that. And then we go all the way down where we've got our ground covers. This is what we can call an aerated bed. It's off the ground. We've got green material at the very bottom, which is composting, and then we've got which is a long nutrient release bed, which is like a double dug bed, and then above it we've got layers where we've got decomposing materials at various stages, plus cow manure. That's very rich if you look at that. If we look around here, of course, sod's law, we won't find any, but there's worms everywhere as well that are working away. Perhaps if we look at one of the other ones, and then we cover that all up. Right now, because it's winter, we have quite a bit of dew, and this mulch here is holding that water, because we're in drought now, is holding that water on the ground. Plus the kind of growth here, we've got corianders and cresses, which are low onto the ground, and not using up too much of the precious nutrients. But this is where we have problems, where we have invasive plants like this guavadilla, which just comes on and takes over.
But it does produce fruit that you eat.
It produces fruit, but it stops the oxygen from getting to these plants. So this needs to be managed a bit. In this garden here, we've got not just fruit that's for eating, but it's to attract other insects that eat aphids and things like that, like the marigold, which the scent, some of these invasive pests don't like the smell of, and it attracts other ones which then also eat other pests. So it's a very strong deterrent for an organic garden. There's a certain amount of weeds in here as well. If we look here, these are some weeds growing there. We allow that. We share the garden. We've got nice cloves growing as well, which is really good. On the sides here, we got roots creating networks, holding everything inside here. In this one here, we've got mints, and we've got some gooseberries over there. Smells lovely. If you're into that, and we can also put strawberries in some gardens. At the bottom there, we've got strawberries holding the whole thing together. So we've got garden and garden. Yeah, peanuts here, which are coming good soon. In about 2 weeks' time we can harvest these. And carrots are coming right as well now. The seeds there, the marigolds are now going to seed, which I'll just distribute. Okay, so this is our dam, which already now we're a month and a half into the dry season, and we're seeing quite a bit of depletion of the water already. But last year we just managed to survive with it, but this year we've got more fish in it, so it's going to be interesting to see. Some of the fish are already at edible size. Just haven't worked out to catch the buggers yet. There's some turtles in here as well, frogs. So it's quite diverse. Turtles take out the small fish to try and keep the population down a bit. You can see that each rice has its own little, each grain of rice. There's a little sheath that exists in. Here's your grain of rice. Our food production has been up about 20 to 30% since we've had the bees here. We were getting some bees still before we put the hive here from the forest, but this hive is about 6-7 months old now and is very, very active. We've already put the second super on the top. So the super is where our honey lives. So the big box at the bottom where the queen lives, and then above there is where when that's full, they move up, and that's when we harvest our honey. So the middle one is is now full, and the top one is half full now. And what we'll do is, as we go into winter now, the activity will be less and less. And we'll put on one more super, I think, and then we'll harvest the honey probably in the springtime. So now we're not just looking at some kind of one-dimensional garden. We're taking it to all different, and we're utilizing all of it. And we're rotating them all the time. And then also protecting them through the winter months. So it's just being conscious. But certainly there's a lot less energies put into this garden as it develops more and more and more. And nature is allowed to do her thing, which is what's really exciting about it. And it truly, I do believe in about 2 years' time, it will be a food forest. And if we can get more and more of these into these communities, and people can understand them and nurture them, and yes, take, but then also put back and feed, then we can start to create community around these sources of food.
If you cannot prove the economic benefits of your case, it's really difficult to convince the financial department. And one of the ways that we have done it is working together with the London School of Economics with their city program. Stockholm have done that too, and other cities, but also bringing in a report that shows that green economy, in fact, is good business, is also important for the city council to see that on the table. We have a lot of a good starting point in Copenhagen for that, and that is also important. When you go around in Copenhagen, what you see is not least all our bikers. We are now up 45% of all trips in Copenhagen every day is done by bike. In fact, it's more than 60% of Copenhageners using their bike every day. But what you can't see is that we have district heating. Almost 100% of all buildings in Copenhagen is heated by district heating, and 63% is renewable now. So we are also on the way to make that change to 2025, where we have to be 100% renewable. We have also taken the decision, or the city council has taken the decision, to build 100 turbines in Denmark, and we are in the tender process, on the national tender process for the time being in doing that. So that is an important part of the transformation. Electric vehicles, it's difficult to have the same numbers as in Norway, that's for sure, but we're doing it ourselves in our own fleet, also with a more efficient fleet, and have now more than 200 electric vehicles in the fleet, and working to the number of 100%. Climate adaptation, we also have to remember that, because that is important for a lot of cities, also our cities. We have had a lot of severe cloudbursts in Copenhagen over the last 4 years with really high damage, and so that is also, we have just approved, or the city council have just approved 300 projects to implement over the coming years. So a simple plan. What I want to say is that technology is maybe not the difficult part here. We have the technologies more or less. Of course, we have to improve and innovate on that. But what is really difficult is the involvement of stakeholders. We need to work in new ways with the stakeholders, with industry and universities. Otherwise, it will be impossible to solve the climate problem. Just a few figures on development. As I said, 2.8 ton per capita, and a 31% reduction in total in the last 9 years. And we see also a reduction in transport, but a slight increase last year, so we have to follow that the coming years, because that is really one of the challenges in cities. Yeah, so to conclude, I think what we can show in the Nordic cities is that we can have a strong political commitment for this transformation, and that is also a really important message to other cities around in the world. Also that we have good financial basic, and that is one of the issues also here in Paris, we need a financial solutions for cities. Otherwise, the infrastructure will not be the right one for the next 10 years, where a lot of cities will increase rapidly. Broad stakeholder involvement is key, and we have to work with new partnership models, public-private innovation, for example, but also having some common business plans together with, develop that together with business and universities. And finally, and not least, a lot of communication about what we're doing, sharing our knowledge with cities and citizens in what for the implementation of that is really key. Thank you.
Copenhagen and Stockholm are one of the first 10 cities full members of the Compact of Mayors, which of course we are very proud of, and but it's also an example of what we're doing. Stockholm are one of Europe's fastest growing cities in right now. We are growing by about between 15 and 20,000. Half are coming from the hospital, it's newborn babies, and the other half is coming from is immigration. And right now, as you perhaps know, Sweden and Stockholm as well are facing a very serious situation when it comes to immigrants. We have never seen anything like it, and the capacity to take care of everybody who wants to come to Sweden is over the edge and over the capacity. But we think the master plan is to create a dense city, and we think that it's also a sustainable city. So we want to use the facilities for public transit and biking. It's a shift in transport mode in Stockholm. And so also a different attitude among the public. When I started to work in the city hall 25 years ago, most people thought that Stockholm shouldn't grow. Today we want to grow, and it's a political consensus both that we want to grow, but also about the environment and sustainability. My mayor from the Green Party is not here, but there is nowadays very little difference between the conservative side and the left-wing side. We have a left-wing majority in the city hall, but we right now, since a year back, that we had 8 years of a conservative coalition, and basically it's totally different compared to the situation 10 years ago. What we are measuring here is heating, electricity and transport. Of course we are aware about the consumption and the goods, but we have the same conclusion as you. It's almost impossible to measure it, and we don't want to ruin our statistics. We still want to do what we can do in the city, and no matter what will happen in this conference, what happened in Copenhagen 5 years ago, and we still want to do what we can to minimize our carbon dioxide emissions. So we have gone from 5.3 tons in 1990. We are right now down at somewhere 2.8, perhaps 2.6, 2.7, because we have rather warm winters. And the next goal is to be down to 2.3 tons in 2020, and to be a totally fossil fuel-free city. This is more complicated. I know that you want to be a climate neutral city, and the first capital being climate neutral in 2025, but to be a fossil fuel-free city is to have no fossil or carbon dioxide emissions at all. So what we are now planning for, how to get rid of the plastic in the incineration plants, for example, how do we control the car traffic? That is the biggest challenge that we have in Stockholm. And as you can see, we're down at about 2.5 million tons CO2 emissions. We have lowering it in the emissions in the city by a million million tons CO2 emissions since the last 15 years. And the blue line here is heating. and this is electricity, and that is car traffic and transport. And we think that we will be totally fossil-free heating in 2030, somewhere between 2025 and 2030. It's a discussion to perhaps be it already in 2020, but that would be extremely expensive, and we don't control our energy company. For the heating company, it's where half is owned by the Finnish company Fortum, which is owned by the Finnish state, basically. And electricity, we are calculating the Nordic mix here. If you're then Swedish electricity, almost fossil-free. It's half is hydropower, then 40% is nuclear power, and the rest is wind, some solar, and some combination of the in the district heating systems. The big challenge is the traffic. How can we ensure that the car driving in Stockholm, and half of all car driving in Stockholm is not Stockholmers, it's they're coming outside from the neighbor municipalities in the region of Stockholm, but how can we control them so they don't use fossil fuels? And that is a challenge. We don't have the legal access to every measurements that we need in action, but that is what we want to do. I use this is the old king, our present king, which is Gustav II Adolf, is the present king's grandpa, and the king will be here tomorrow, I think. But here is inaugurating the combination when we combine the southern metro line with the western metro line. And the interesting thing, we are lucky in Stockholm to have very foreseen politicians. They planned metro stations to places where no one lived because they had the inner vision of the growing city. And the environmental work and the climate work have brought back the long-term perspective. What we are facing in Stockholm as one of the biggest challenge is the sea level rise of the Baltic Sea, because if the Baltic Sea flood into the big Lake Mälaren, we have no fresh water. This is Hammarby waterfront. It's one of the first and most well-known eco-districts in the world. But here was the aim to reduce the environmental impact by 50%. Almost succeeded, but the experiences from here, we took it to the next district that we will reduce the environmental impact by another 50%. Here we have a very tough energy performance request. We own the land, the city of Stockholm owns the land, and there is a number of private developers, about 25 to 30 developers, who are building up 10,000 new apartments in a new green residential district in the north inner city of Stockholm. In Stockholm, and I think as in Copenhagen and Oslo, we have a green market-driven situation. This is an example where it's not so much of new technology, but it's a new thinking. This building is the head office for two big newspapers in Stockholm, the Svenska Dagbladet and Aftonbladet, and they are it's heated by the heat surplus from the central station that used to be ventilated out. Now it's in use. It's cold from the water outside, and it's an example of that private developers and private construction companies are competing to be the greenest in Stockholm. We also have the district heating. We have the market share is a little bit more than 80%, but this is also the third party interest that innovate, that we are now analyzing what sources are there from computer centers that could be used to feed the district heating system. And the district heating system will be almost fossil-free. It will be fossil-free in 2030 at latest, I would say. But we're using new sources and trying to develop energy that is already made, and instead of ventilate out the heat surplus from different offices or computer centers, etc., we try to use it. The same thing with the district cooling. Instead of using electricity, we use the water to cool our buildings. And this is also the contributor to the better air quality. Stockholm has 100 times better air quality today than we had 50 years ago when I was a kid in the city of Stockholm. Congestion charges is one of the most well-known infrastructure project in Stockholm. It was introduced in 2006 after huge opposition from the Stockholmers. Now everyone is, it's a consensus. We will increase the price by 75% from the 1st of January 2016, and there is no opposition. Everyone knows it, but it's fully accepted as a tool. And the traffic level it has been remained a reduction compared to 2005, but reasonably 25%. And despite the fact that we now are 100,000 more people in the region and 200,000 more people in the region and 100,000 in the city, and no increase of car traffic. It's a traffic note simply because we don't have the road space anymore, and we are reserving the big roads for public transit and bikers. And we are now having heavily investment program in new metro lines, one up in the north, one to the east, one small extension in the northwest, and a new southern metro line, just to make people to manage the transport. We also try to increase the infrastructure for electrical cars. We think it will explode on the market in the 5 years, but we don't control it by ourselves, but we need to get the price down, and we don't have the same situation as you have in Norway, where an electrical car is about the same price as a normal car. But we have, for 20 years, we have been run a clean car project in Stockholm, and Stockholmers want to buy clean cars. So more than 20%, almost 25% is cars that emitted less than 95 gram. But 2040 it will be 0 gram CO2 emission. And so what we are working with is the heavy traffic, and we have been running different EU projects to promote clean truck in Stockholm and in Europe as well. And we work together with the business community with the climate agreement. It started 2007 with 5 companies, and now it's 170 different companies want to take part in a greener and Stockholm, and to reduce and help the city to achieve our climate goals. And this is the broadband net of Stockholm, the city-owned company called Stokab. That's Europe's biggest fiber net, and that will help us to reduce it. We are now using the technology and ICT development as a tool in the climate combat. And the Stockholmers are behind us. 90% of the Stockholmers think it's very good that we have high ambitions. And people also accept that we put a demand on the household to reduce their CO2 emissions and to adopt a more sustainable lifestyle. And we have tremendous success where we have a cookbook of sustainability, climate cookbook, which have been a success in Stockholm. So we have already decided to be fossil fuel free 2050. Now it's already in 2040. It will be it's almost finished in the proposal for the city council, but it will be a consultation on that. So somewhere in May, June, we will see the city council decide on the roadmap for 2040. Thank you very much.
It's my pleasure to be here in Paris today, and I'm very glad that I have the opportunity to briefly explain you Helsinki Climate Roadmap that we recently finalized in Helsinki. In Helsinki we have a target of being carbon neutral and climate resilient by 2050, so a little bit more slowly than Copenhagen and Stockholm. Waste has an almost minimal impact in this respect. Households are the main source of greenhouse emissions, over 50%. Traffic is number, or services and workplaces is number 2 in this, and we have relatively little industry in Helsinki. Only 10% of the emissions are produced by industry. The city's own services and buildings and public transport is causing only 8% of emissions, which is a relatively small amount. So we have to have an effective impact on the other private citizens, for example. They have to come into this work in order that Helsinki can reduce greenhouse emissions in an effective way. Here are the emissions and scenarios. The red line is emissions in tons per capita, and blue line is the emissions, the total emissions. The difference is due to the relatively rapid increase in inhabitants in Helsinki. We are also growing, as we heard, is the case in Copenhagen and Stockholm. We have got about 100 inhabitants more compared to year 1990. Now we are about 600,000, and if you think about year 2050, we are expecting to have 260,000 inhabitants more in Helsinki, which is about 40% increase in the present figures. We have had about 23% decrease in total emissions compared to year 1990, and almost 40% if you calculate that per capita. So the direction is good, but there is still a lot of work to be done, of course. Last spring we published Helsinki Climate Roadmap. I took a couple of them with me. I don't know where they disappeared, but there was about 50 examples of this. There we try to explain to politicians and also to general public what could each individual do in order to minimize our climate footprint. There are many practical advice, and also we have collected all the things that Helsinki City has been doing during the past years. We found some 800 different projects and different decisions that had an impact on climate change, and we kind of put them together to this climate roadmap. As I mentioned, we want to be carbon neutral by 2050, and emissions from the city area should be diminished by 30% by year 2020, and we have almost reached that target. Also emissions from energy production reduction with 20%, that has already almost been reached. Okay, our vision for 2050 is that we want to have a new climate-friendly modes of business, and we want to have also a green environment that promotes the health and well-being of residents. That's not a very easy task as the city is growing so fast, but I think that our city planning is doing a very good work in this respect. And we want that energy would be produced in a carbon neutral way, and that we would have the world's best energy efficiency. We are also doing quite many projects with rain and meltwater, how to treat them, how they could be used in parks and gardens, and so that they wouldn't go to the wastewater treatment plants. And we are aiming at a dense urban structure, and that of course helps us in generating low transportation emissions in Helsinki. Some ongoing energy saving projects. We have a so-called energy renaissance in suburbs. We have a lot of buildings that have been built in 50s and 60s, and now they are about to need some renovation. And we want to increase the energy efficiency of this building in a significant way. We have also published some let's say, practical guidance how to do it, and also some possibilities how to get finance for this work. Yes, of course we have several advisory services and campaigns in this respect. And what comes to our own buildings, city buildings, we aim at nearly zero energy guidelines. For example, the building of Helsinki Environment Center, in which I work, is now carbon free this year, and it's the most energy efficient building of Finland actually, even it's already 4 years old, and I think that's a pity. I would like that someone would be better, but no one has done that so far. Yes, Helsinki is producing now heat and power in a very efficient way as it combines the production of electricity, production of heat, and also cooling. And this system saves about 40% of fuels compared to normal system. We are increasing slowly the use of renewable energy sources. It's now only 7%, but it's going to be 20 by 2020. Actually, probably tomorrow a very important decision will be made in this respect. The city council will probably decide to close our biggest energy plant, Hanasaari, and that means that use of coal in Helsinki will decrease by 2/3. So a big difference, but decision will be made tomorrow, so I can't be 100% sure if this is the case, but I'm almost 100% sure that this will be the decision. Yeah. One simple example is Katrivala heating and cooling plant, which is the biggest plant in the world of this kind. It uses the waste energy from the wastewater of Helsinki. It takes the heat out from it, and sometimes during summer, if it's very hot in Helsinki, that can also sometimes happen. That then this can be used vice versa, so that it gives cooling energy to the city. It's about 80% more energy efficient than let's say normal plant would be. We are going to have guidelines for locating wind power in the city area. We had a study that showed that most people want to have more wind power in the city, and that's what is going to happen in Helsinki as well. We try to adapt to increasing rainfall and flooding, and of course the methodologies, requirements and guidance for more energy efficient buildings are being created. We'll try to create a global reference area for smart and clean solutions, and there we have quite a good collaboration between cities, businesses and government. This project was launched in March this year, and now we have already some 80 companies, big companies or universities, research institutes there, and they have done some 150, let's say, agreement on what they are going to do in this respect. And of course, mobility issues, building and water supply, energy efficiency, consumer and clean tech are subject of this kind of picture of every single house of Helsinki, and you can see whether your house is losing energy from roof rooftop and compare it to your neighbor if you want to. And also the similar exercise was made of the solar potential of the rooftops, that every single person in Helsinki can look how his or her apartments is doing in this respect, whether to put solar panels on the roof or not. Ongoing in mobility, city tolling is a high, let's say, political issue or hot political issue, but I'm sure that we are moving to that direction. We are doing a lot of work concerning the mobility as a service. We want to increase walking and biking. I, for example, bike every day to my work, but it's very far from the Copenhagen figures that it's. I would like to have same situation in Helsinki as well.
Now, with response to the political will, no, I don't think we're quite there yet. But I think since we last met at such an event, I think we have seen an awful lot of sensitisation. And I think the media exposés have put it on the agenda at levels it's not hitherto been. We can only hope that it carries on. I believe that the cooperation which has been shown in some of the famous cases and the recent arrests indicates that it is moving forward much quicker than I would have thought it would do.
One of the specific question that I have, and in a way it's a question to the whole audience, is do we have the necessary political will to do something on the criminal issues of this problem? Now, on IUU fishing, there's a lot of political statements through the African Union and different regional organizations, European Union, probably in ASEAN as well. I would think that they have different statements on IUU, but we are lacking similar statements on these issues, the criminal issues of this problem. So my question is, do we have enough political will and understanding of the problem that we are discussing here to move this forward? Thank you.
We had the possibility at one stage that the funder might land somewhere in Durban or Cape Town. If we had the license provision, we would have been able to arrest immediately and take action in South Africa. Just an example of what the license provision can do. And then the third maybe suggestion, question, if Marcus can maybe quickly react to it. If we bring in a license provision, why is the license provision, why must we limit it to saying fish products or wildlife products coming that was harvested in contravention of the laws of another country? Why not say any fish that was harvested in contravention of the laws of another country or in contravention of any international or regional fisheries agreements? Then you make it even wider and more effective.
You know, it may actually do that, and I used a shorthand. There's a whole set of action verbs and nouns in the Lacey Act, and so I went right to the issue of something's harvested, but it's something like harvested, transported, exported, you know, and a whole big set of action verbs, and then the list of underlying laws that you violate include laws and regulations, and it may include U.S. treaties as well. So I believe, for example, CAMLAR would count, but you don't hold me to that.
Another very, very useful thing with the post-state control regime, which I use very often whenever confronted with any kind of suspicion of any kind of illegal activities on behalf of a reefer vessel, is that the information about these vessels that have been detained is very easily available on the internet. Each MOU provide you with a list. And so whenever I have some concern about the vessel, I'm thinking, okay, let's check this out. What is the profile of this vessel? And sure enough, there I can find every single port that this vessel has been inspected in, whether there has been any deficiencies reported, within what amount of time has been fixed and so forth. And when you see some of these reefers and they have 13 defects, etc., well, then that tells you something about what kind of company is behind this, what kind of vessel it is. And if we could have that for fishing vessels as well, it would give us really a wealth of information to profile the operators that we are dealing with.
And indeed, it's something that South Africa is actually looking very seriously into. We have even had the Torremolinos Convention, which is actually making sure that the vessels need to have the AIS to ensure that we are able to track these fishing vessels in our coastline. We have a monitoring room that's operating 24 hours at SAMSA, and I think starting from that we can even collaborate with DAF, with their control room, and try to implement it and have those stringent measures in place. And I think once we ratify that convention, we will be even in a better position to regulate those fishing vessels, even those that comes into South Africa.
I firmly believe that if you do have a suspected IUU vessel, you should actually allow it into your port, and then you can apply the full range of your domestic law to that vessel and thorough investigation and inspection of that vessel. If it's got fish on board, you don't necessarily need to allow them to unload the fish, and you can conduct that investigation, and then you come up with a lot of evidence, a lot of information about who beneficial owners are, where the product might be going, associated persons. Then if you're unhappy with it, leave port. So for those that are looking at port state measures, I'd encourage you to allow them into your ports so that you can then apply the full suite of domestic law. Once they're outside the port, once they're on the high seas, we're limited. Once you've got them in your domestic jurisdiction, you've got far more power.
Another very, very useful thing with the post-state control regime, which I use very often whenever confronted with any kind of suspicion of any kind of illegal activities on behalf of a reefer vessel, is that the information about these vessels that have been detained is very easily available on the internet. Each MOU provide you with a list, and so whenever I have some concern about the vessel, I'm thinking, okay, let's check this out. What is the profile of this vessel? And sure enough, there I can find every single port that this vessel has been inspected in, whether there has been any deficiencies reported, within what amount of time has been fixed and so forth. And when you see some of these reefers and they have 13 defects, etc., well, then that tells you something about what kind of company is behind this, what kind of vessel it is. And if we could have that for fishing vessels as well, it would give us really a wealth of information to profile the operators that we are dealing with.
What would you think of introducing notion of strict liability for certain fisheries crime? We had that in our fisheries law prior to our constitution, and some of that, in South Africa at least, is possibly unconstitutional, but it could be taken up at international domestic level to work towards strict liability. If you are found at the moment with, say, 5 rock lobster in possession, it's up to you to prove that they weren't taken illegally.
Where you could take away somebody's boat, you could forfeit their fish, you could ban them from the industry, because what you're doing is you're putting the onus on them to comply. And so maybe the simplest example of that is a speeding ticket. Nobody really cares whether you knew you were traveling over the speed limit. The rule is you travel over the speed limit, you have to pay the ticket. And the idea is that it puts the onus on you to stay below the speed limit or around there. Criminal law, at its very fundamental level, deals with blame. It's society blaming an individual for being bad. doing something that was bad. And so at a very, very fundamental level, I think every legal system that's civilized that I'm aware of, you have two components, actus reus and mens rea. And the idea is look, if I pull out a gun and I shoot somebody, am I guilty of murder? And the answer is, well, it depends. If I thought I was shooting at a target and somebody happened to be standing behind the target, do we regret that? We absolutely regret that. Am I guilty of intentionally murdering somebody? I'm not. And that's a very important moral principle that I think we have to embrace. And certainly it would be unconstitutional to have strict liability, I think, in the United States. It's probably not a satisfying answer, but it's fundamental to criminal law. You can regulate society in other ways, but if you're going to use criminal law, strict liability is almost never a possibility. It does happen in the United States in very, very rare circumstances, but it would almost certainly be unconstitutional in a situation like the Lacey Act.
Well, I think you've got a good point, because there is a balance between risk and the consequences. Everyone does risk analysis, so do they. But the risks and the costs may be quite low, because the criminalisation of fisheries crime is not equivalent to the level of criminalisation of the risks for, say, drugs. And it may be well the case that the value of the vessels is not terribly high, and they may be prepared to write those off if they can buy some other ones quite easily. But it also may reach a situation where the vessels are forfeit and they're auctioned, and maybe they can buy them back at a cheaper rate and have a vessel which is free of any issues because it's seen as changed owner. But it may be the same entity but with a different corporate role. I mean, that happens in the maritime industry, where we've seen vessels being abandoned with a cruise and the same people have bought them back at auction, which means there's no liens against them and they can carry on doing it again repeatedly. So there is a risk there as well.
I did a bit of research on the Lacey Act, and I wrote, after the Bengas saga, I wrote a long article in the Cape Times suggesting exactly that, because we have wildlife crime generally, as you all know, rhino horn, elephant poaching, and I was hoping it would be taken up, particularly in Vietnam and other Asian countries where our rhino horn, etc. goes. But I got no feedback from a very prominent article in the local media. So I'd like to ask, not on the panel, but I know there's a delegate from at least Indonesia or other Asian delegates, what they see the political hurdles might be to have a Lacey type act in their jurisdictions.
Port state control is really not something that we have been discussing a lot in the fisheries crime context yet. Still, it is such an untapped resource for our ability to conduct routine control and investigations of vessels, or around inspections of vessels. And for those of you that perhaps isn't familiar with port state control, because it doesn't really exist in the fisheries context, it might be worthwhile just give 2 words of background to how the system works. So you've got a number of conventions that do not apply to fishing vessels in general, they apply to transport vessels. So your reefers are covered, but not your fishing vessels. Now, countries around the world are in what you call a memorandum of understanding, regional arrangements, where all the ports undertake to inspect a certain percentage of all vessels that come to port. And then they routinely check what are the living and working conditions of the people on board a vessel. Is this vessel seaworthy? Is it safe, etc.? And in the moment they find non-compliance, the vessel is detained and it's being held back until these errors are being, or faults are being amended. Now, what a wonderful tool in our context. The vessels that I climbed aboard together with Bernhard Wiedemann the other day, 7 vessels coming here to Cape Town. Now, they were fishing vessels, they're not covered by any of the C-188 that John Lidlow was speaking about. It would have been a wonderful tool to assist us in ensuring minimum standard is not enforced yet. So we can't use that as a basis. Now, on board these vessels, the working and living conditions were horrendous. These vessels were clearly unsafe and unseaworthy. Now, you can spend a lot of time prosecuting the crimes, but you can bring that vessel out of circulation very easily if it's not maintained to certain standards.
The biggest problem that I see is one that we've talked about in numerous panels, and that's corruption. And it's not just corruption with respect to the bribing the environmental police and et cetera to look the other way. It's also corruption in the judiciary and in the prosecution offices. I'll give you an example. I was able to really build a case against Arnold Benjes in the United States based on mens rea and other things is because I was able to split cooperators. And there's no way of sugarcoating that. What that means is that I arrested people. I said, you are going to face a long prison sentence. Here's roughly what that prison sentence will be. That's par for the course, and you're welcome to go ahead and either go to trial or plead guilty and go to jail. Or you can work with the United States, cooperate, provide truthful testimony in the prosecution or investigation of another person, and you can get a lower sentence. And we were allowed to do that because we have a judicial system that is transparent and that the rule of law matters. Let me flip to something else that happened to me recently. I was in Masai Mara in Kenya, and I was asking one of the wildlife officials there, how many poachers have you arrested in the last year? And he gave me an astonishing answer. He said 40. And I was stumped because if I were prosecuting there, I would have taken each one of those 40 and I would have flipped them, and that would have turned into 2 more arrests and then 4 more arrests, and we would have had easily 200 people arrested and worked our way up the chain. That's how you do a prosecution here. That's how you do it in the United States. I said, what happened to those 40? And the guy said, I have no idea. All right. And you need to fix the corruption in all of the countries in the world, and that's what will ultimately strengthen us.
G'day, we're here at Monkey Valley Resort at Crown Eagle, overlooking Long Beach. We're going to cook some beef fillet today. It's free range fillet, it's organic. It's not fed the normal stuff that you get from these battery sort of animals, that is fed grain that is made from that has been affected, and it leaves a sort of footprint on the planet, and it's not really good for you. It's also known that in future we're going to start running out of proteins and natural food, so we must start looking at ways for our own well-being and for other generations to come to utilize food that is natural and less protein. This meat that we're going to cook today, we're only going to use like 8% protein of the whole meal, and the rest is all going to be carbohydrates or vegetables in this case. So we're going to start by roasting off some pepper, red pepper, lots of color. It's known to lower your blood sugar or your cholesterol. Very good for you. It's got a lot of color. It's tasty. They say that if you eat red pepper in the morning with your egg whites, it's good for keeping the hunger at bay. So we're going to start off by roasting this in the pan slowly. Just going to add a little bit of butter, pure butter. Also very good for you in small amounts. And then I got the beef fillet here. And I'm just going to cut a small section of it. That's all we're going to need for this dish. And then we got some aubergine here, also known as brinjal or eggplant. That's going to go into the pan with the red pepper there. And then I got some baby marrow here, also known as courgettes or zucchini in America. Nice green color, which has got a lot of fiber, which is good for you. Helps with the digestion. So we're all just going to put it all in the pan and just let it cook slowly on a low heat there till it's ready, while we prep the rest of the ingredients. So I got a little bit of broccoli here. So once again, nice green color, lots of fiber. And I'm not adding any water or anything here, I'm just relying purely on the low heat and the natural water that's in the vegetables to slowly sort of cook it down. I'm going to take another pan, you can put a lid on this, but I'm going to take another pan and just let it cook in there slowly. So you're creating like a little, almost like a little pot, steam pot, closed pot there, that's going to cook itself. Because it's closed, the steam will drop back into the pan, so it will ensure that the vegetables doesn't burn. So by the time your vegetables is cooked, it will have a nice color. Then I'm going to take a little bit of cherry tomatoes. So this is almost like a Mediterranean dish. Olives. Just going to take the pip out of olives. Then I'm going to take a little bit of red wine here. This is going to be the main part of our sauce for the beef. So I'm just going to pour a little bit of red wine over there just to let it start marinating slowly before we cook it, while we wait for the vegetables to cook. This is going to take like another 5 minutes or so. We're just going to wait for that. After this finishes, then we're going to start cooking our meat to the temperature that's the desired temperature, and we're going to add the vegetables to that. Right, so the vegetables is carried on for another 5 minutes now. It's almost ready, so it's now time to heat our pan for our beef fillet. Just getting a bit of temperature there. Once that reaches temperature, we take a little bit of butter. Season the meat. Right, I'm going to turn this to this side because it's colder there. I need to heat here. In the meantime, while we wait, we can have a sip of red wine. Which is good for the cholesterol. Okay, our butter is starting to melt slowly. It's going to be sufficient and it's going to be a nice flavor to the meat. The red pepper complements the meat, the baby marrow, everything else here is going to complement it. Your olives that you've got here is going to add a lot of flavor. It's got a lot of saltiness to it, it's got a lot of tartness to it. It's cherry tomatoes, full of sugar. Once you put it to the heat, it's going to caramelize, it's going to add to the flavor there. Now I've got a little bit of goat's cheese here as well, which is going to like just cream it off nicely for us. So while the meat is cooking, I'm going to start plating the food now. Before I place that on, I'm going to take a little bit of goat's cheese at the bottom here. Put a little bit of aubergine or eggplant, top of that. Baby marrow on top of that. Some of the red pepper. So we've got a nice spectrum of colors there. Just some red wine, olives, fresh cherry tomatoes. A little bit of garnish. And this is our beef fillet with the roasted red peppers, the broccoli, red wine tomato sauce.
Hello, my name is Jason Saul and this is Erica Saul, and welcome to ENN Network, the most informal news channel you've ever encountered in your life. We bring you a story on the environment. We'll be bringing you interviews and current news events. We will never talk about terrorism unless it's environmental terrorism, which I expect is going to be an upcoming event in our near future as people become more and more desperate to stop the madness that is kind of driving this world. There's maybe 2 or 3 really hot trending stories at the moment, intermixed with a bunch of aggregate stories. We're going to first talk a bit of local news. So on Monday, or was it Tuesday, sorry, the coal-fire power stations had their license for water suspended. Now, this water story is an ongoing, growing situation here in South Africa. Later in the week, a huge report came out in the Western Cape saying that the Western Cape is facing severe drought. This goes hand in hand with the events going up in the Northern Cape, hand in hand with the events going up in KZN. Water is becoming more and more scarce. The cycles that normally would replenish our supplies are changing in quite a dramatic fashion. Of interest, this is not just a localized event here to South Africa. You can actually see that this is starting to occur all over the world, which actually kind of links some of our international stories that are happening at the moment. So they were basically talking about the effects of climate change on amphibians, as well as the increase in copper content in all aquifers, so river aquifers. The study was done in Australia, but then confirmed again also to be happening in the States. They are seeing mass kind of deaths of most large amphibians. These are your toads, your frogs, and due to shifting weather patterns, too much heat, when they do find a source of water, the copper levels in the water make it no longer suitable for them to exist, and frogs are dying out in the numbers. And if that doesn't alarm you, then we have the exact same story coming through from a study that is done inside of the States. Basically, they've been picking up a lot of dolphin deaths, not just washed up dolphins, but washed up baby dolphins. And you know, the level and intensity and frequency of these kind of stories are becoming more and more and more commonplace. A study was done, and now you and I would think that this should be fairly common knowledge, but this study was so necessary, and it was completed, and the study basically highlighted that it is not possible for us to live or cohabit this planet with the focus of everything that we do focused on growth. So now that sounds kind of normal to me and you, but this study is what's going to be utilized to start to change law, to start to challenge companies, to start to challenge kind of reserve banks that always have a perpetual growth focus. They're always saying we must grow, we must grow, we must expand, populations must always climb. They panic about should a population start to descend. But the fact of the matter is that this growth is what is fueling this massive reliance on fossil fuels. Not only fossil fuels, it's fueling this massive pollution that we're doing, which is now, as you can see, impacting amphibians, impacting dolphins. And then just on Thursday, the report came out that it was impacting bees. So that they were trying to figure out what colony, why bees were kind of dying from colony collapse. And basically it's now proven that the increased temperature is affecting a primary, what did they call it, a bacteria that is found inside of the bees, and the bees are in fact starting to die out in their droves, not because necessarily environmental toxicity, which is your GMO stuff, Roundup, all that kind of stuff, but also because of shifting climate. Shifting climate is actually changing various different fungals and bacteria that the bees naturally have, which is a big problem. So now even Einstein said, you know, if you lose your bees, the world will end shortly thereafter, because bees are a key corner species. On Wednesday, a story came out about the impact of fin harvesting on sharks, and how it was decimating the oceans by wiping out apex predators. But then also the very next day, a story was released about how in Malaysia they are taking fishing and illegal fishing so seriously that they are confiscating boats and blowing them up to make reefs. And so far they were saying they've done something like 64 boats. They've confiscated off illegal fishermen and they sink them. They don't ask questions. They don't, there's no big court battles. They get the people off the boat. They drag the boat to their nearest reef and they blow it up. And you're going to see more and more of this happening because people are starting to realize the impact that we're having on the ocean. Now, let's not forget that this week is International Recycling Week. So obviously, in that line, you had a lot of stories coming out that are related to the levels of plastic in the oceans. You're having stories coming out in relation to the kind of lifespan that plastics have while they're sitting in the environment. And we already picked up that story from late last week in relation to how the volume of plastic in the sea is outnumbering sea life something like 4-to-1. And the worst part is that even should the plastic break down, so they're quantifying it by, say, the level of output given from a land area, but so even if you were to break down the big bottles and it's the actual microparticles that are getting into the oceans that are causing a lot of the difficulties. And this is becoming more and more of a problem. People don't recycle. People continue to manufacture waste in everything, pretty much everything that we do. So if you summarize all of those kind of stories, you take a look at the bees, where first of all we were causing colony collapse with the use of pesticides. And then in addition to those pesticides, it was actually nicotine-based pesticides, which of course was a product of Monsanto. Thank you, Monsanto, for screwing up another thing. And then you take a look at the amphibians, that because of our impact on the environment, the amphibians are starting to feel the impacts and are wiping out. And then the increase of copper in the water from mining activities, from, our impact is starting to show more and more. Now, if you are a person that's just tuned to this channel, the only awareness you would have of any of this would be that Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders had a massive argument on a debate in New York about who's going to become the next president. And also you would have been aware about various terrorism blasts around the world. But because you're now tuned to this, you can actually start to see that around you, the real story of what is happening to this planet is not based upon what Bernie Sanders is doing or whether Vladimir Putin was picked up in the Panama Papers. The real story is that around you, the environment is absolutely collapsing. It's collapsing. And we're not talking about it. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to talk about it. We're trying to bring it to your attention, and we're trying to make it viable for you.
Project would work, where they would come and negotiate because they'd have an agenda. They want to come in here and they want to start a AIDS orphanage or something like that. They would go to the chief and they'd say to the chief, we want to start up an AIDS orphanage and we want to try and employ some people and educate some people and we want to take care of all your AIDS orphans and for that we want some land. And the chief would think about it seriously and he would feel important and say, yes, it's a good idea, we need these things. And there would be this trade-off, but in a way the project would then be beheld to the chief. Whereas we kind of came through the back door here. Firstly, because I came in here with a preconceived idea that this whole tribal system or traditional system was flawed anyway, and it failed. So I came in here with kind of really a judgment against this whole traditional system and things like that, from what I'd heard, which is really unfair, but that's how I came in here. I sort of touched a little bit on what Contra Lesser, which is the Concrete Traditional Leaders, was all about, and it looked dodgy. In a sense, it was quite rude. I should have gone to the great place of this specific council and said, I'm here to do this. The other thing was, having worked in the Transkei before, worked in many other countries in Africa as well, is that you sort of also believe in the bush telegraph. And I sort of thought, well, what I'm doing, if it's important enough, then somebody will hear about it and they'll come and find me and say, let's meet, sort of thing, which didn't happen. So either the Bush telephone didn't get there, or I just haven't been doing enough important stuff really at that level. So what that did for the project anyway was, I think, was quite beneficial in that journey of understanding what these problems are all about, because we didn't have to work to anybody's agenda or had to deliver anything to anybody. While I was busy, not sure what I was really doing, just building this island in the middle of this place that I wasn't familiar with, having never been as close to the coast. I'd worked up in Ngcobo and places like that several years before. To put in a relatively self-sustainable place and hoping that people would just be flocked and would just feel there's some kind of magnetic pull to this place, and we could teach people how to eat and to respect water and soil, and building and things like that, and get their houses stronger, which was really naive of me, I think, in hindsight. I think people are used to being herded in a way, and they just didn't. So they thought in order to engage with me, they'd have to pay me. In other words, if they want to come and make bricks, they'd have to pay me to do that, which was never in my mind, but I didn't articulate that very well, I think. So all this time I'm busy developing these gardens, I'm busy building these buildings, and sorting out these water issues and things like that. And at the same time, I'm watching it collapse around me on the greater scale. The municipality falling to pieces, the water systems falling to pieces, understanding how that's affected the whole dynamics of the community. Because I'm living inside this place and I'm seeing, and I've done this before in other places in other parts of Africa, but never with such a social dysfunctionality, which is what we've got here. So watching people's buildings fall down, and not jumping in these things and trying to save everybody, but just saying, well, tough. You know, you don't, until you decide to integrate, it's what's going to happen. Of course, because what then, whether it was a good thing or a bad thing, but this main chief who was head of Controlesa, who I was working with, died, and left this huge void suddenly that we had started, which was about leadership. And he completely saw things the way that I saw things, of understanding that present leadership was flawed and had to be nurtured, and then to start focusing on the next leadership, the children, and to create leadership schools for these guys to come through so we can start to shift the whole thing around. Everything is based on oil.
Yeah.
Our monetary system, our judicial system, our education systems, everything on this table. Well, this is now second generation, so that's now no longer oil required. But that's our existence. Oil comes crash. I mean, we see it. I mean, yesterday, I mean, the Dow Jones fell another 3.5% yesterday. You know, you look across the board, the American markets, it's just red. They just crashed. Oil organizations went down 4 to 5%. They're just coming crashing down, and it's happening every day. They're totally overinflated because they're based on where they think the oil reserves are, not where the oil, because everybody's overselling their oil. They're saying, oh no, we've got loads of it still, because they don't want to create panic. We're into these long wars now. I mean, when you've got a country like America that's a net importer of oil, when they produce, I think about 2 to 3, not even 2% probably anymore, of the world's oil. But they use 25% of the world's oil. I mean, they have to control the world. The economy is based on it. They have to control the world's oil, which means they have to be in war. So that's what's going to go on. I mean, it's not going to stop. The only thing that's going to stop it, when there's no more oil to put in the ship, the HSS Indomitable or whatever it's called, to get it across the ocean anymore, that's when it's all going to come grinding to a halt. So we go back to this governance you're talking about. It's all based on central control. But what happens when that central control is broken? The most recent example of that happening was when Katrina went into New Orleans. And it cut off, in the first world country, okay, it cut off Washington, D.C. And within hours, people turned on people. Shops were pillaged. Next thing, people just turned on people. Okay, and that's what happens when there's chaos, when there's no more control, there's no one. So now in a third world or developing country, when suddenly that power line is cut, it's going to be mayhem. Unless we can shift it and we can get people and communities, let's call them transition, whatever we want to call them, all these words have been banning around, where they are taking care of themselves. Where they're not reliant upon the central system of control, which is money. And so there's something that's gone. You see, in our conditioning, and we are so conditioned, we have become codependent, where we depend upon each other. And this is really it's a disease. If we use which I do often, I use an analogy of a forest. And we see these forests where they're codependent, where the trees cross over each other and they stop the flow of air through each other, and they stop the growth. And we've seen it here, there's so much evasive stuff comes in. But if you look at a forest that each tree stands strong on its own, and then as a collective, it's incredibly strong. It's a strong, healthy environment. And it's a three-dimensional living thing then. And if we can create that where people can stand strong on their own as individuals, and then as a community, they're really, really strong. And they do things out of free will. Then we can shift the consciousness. But that goes against the religious beliefs, because that's all about codependency. I mean, goodness, it's so disempowering. It's there's this fellow who died for my sins. For goodness sakes, I'll die for my own sins. It's very disempowering, and that's where it starts. And it's been so successful. It's indoctrinated in this. I mean, in these areas that I am in. This religion that's used here now, several versions of Christianity that are all over these areas that I'm in here. Unbelievable, the fear and the obsession with death. And the amount of resources that get put into death. And this dignity in death, but where's the dignity in life? And that's what we need to be focusing on. Is that every moment that we have this gift of living, and let's make it count. Let's be authentic. But we're all put our belief in old mutual and funeral schemes for our death, so we can be remembered. But these guys who have they throw these huge parties. They spent their life beating their wives, abusing their children. But they had this incredible funeral, man. It was huge. You should have seen it. Strong Muti there. No. It's disgraceful. Let's put that dignity into life now. And I really do believe that in this religion that existed before we came along with this whole sort of Christianity trip and things like that, was this incredible dynamic relationship between the earth and the people in Africa. They call it Kwamata or something like that. And it's brilliant. It's so naive. It's brilliant. It's got counterbalance. It's just based in love and respect. And if you respect the sun for rising, for setting, you respect the seasons, you show respect to the animal you kill to nurture yourself. You respect your spouse or your kids, Suddenly, here come these guys and saying, "Oh, hold on, you guys are savages unless you bow down to this figure here. That's it. You're going to go and die a miserable death in hell and things like it." And how could people come here with anything but love anyway? Because that's all we believe in is love. Okay, so this is how people are building here. People without much means, which is called a wattle and daub. So here you've got your wattle, which is your wooden framework. And they're tacking in the daub, which is the clay, in here. Now, historically, this is a brilliant way to build. I mean, a lot of your Tudor houses in the United Kingdom, which have quite adverse weather, use this system. Okay, and they've lasted for hundreds and hundreds of years. This house won't last a year. Okay, and they have to redo it. What I'd like to propose that the way that this has been mixed, the way it's been mixed in, there's not much intention going into this. It shows a victim mentality within the people, because if this clay was worked through properly, in other words, it was kneaded like you knead bread, and they put a bit of some dry grass in it, or some millie husks and things like that into it, it would create a stronger integrity in the bond, and it would last for years and years and years. But this has really just been put together very loosely, and with not much love goes into this wall. And that's why we're using cements and things like that, because it's practical and it gives it longevity. Now, if you go into some of your sort of Central American, Santa Fe, those sort of areas, for them, which they use the adobe blocks, which is also just sort of sun-dried bricks, clay bricks. For them to come once a year, and the woman would come and they would repair the cracks, because they're also in very adverse dry conditions, where the bricks create wonderful insulation for their homes. It works really nicely for them. But for them, it's part of their cultural heritage. They celebrate the renewal every year, where they would fix up their cracks, they make big clay pits and create a render. That's part of who they are, and then their yearly existence, their yearly rebirthing. Yeah, this is clay which we've got locally here. Now, it's quite a strong clay actually, prone to cracking, but it could be worked through a lot better. You fill this with your mix, okay, with a very little bit amount of water, and then you'll put this on it, and you'll push it down, which is your primary compaction. All right. Then take that over, and then this is where you'll notice the bottom is coming up. Yes. So it's compacting from the bottom. There's your compaction. Alright, so it's compacting up. Up it goes, and it pops the brick out, which should be up there now. 2 people could make a brick every 17 seconds. Yeah. But you get machines now that can do 12 bricks at once, doing the same. But the nice thing about it is that, as opposed to the machines that can make 1,500 bricks a day, there's a huge effect on the environment, where you're actually getting, I mean, that's a hungry machine, and where you're getting that material from. Whereas this here, it's more hand. You can use the foundations of your building to build the walls up. It doesn't have to have such a negative effect on the environment. They're not fully set yet, so I don't want to mess with them too much. So it's 240 mils long, and it's 100 high, and it's 140 wide, which from an engineering perspective is perfect for a wall. You can support a roof with this, lightweight roof, and it'll be fine. This is going to set for about 3 weeks. This digester, which I designed, it's a closed bag. Well, it's got an inlet and an outlet and a gas outlet. So it's made from reinforced PVC, which is the same material as you'll make a jumping castle from, and it's shaped. The shape of it is like a loaf of bread. It's risen, so it has the convex top on it, and everything else is squared. It fits into this frame here that I just built with brick. And how it works is it comes from the toilets. The waste comes into the I can also feed it with green material, which produces most of. If I really want to get a lot of push my my methane levels up, I'll feed it with some bananas or stuff like that, which boosts it. It comes in here, and inside here I have a live culture, which is anaerobic, which means that it exists without oxygen. Okay, so it's the digestion process is anaerobic as opposed to aerobic, which is like your composting loos and things like this. So the microbes that exist inside here break down the waste very, very efficiently, and the energy that comes out of that is the methane gas. Now, if you can smell, Judy, which it's almost a composty smell. There's not necessarily a sewage smell, but there's a slight composty smell. If you come close down here, you could almost smell. You could smell the gas as well, which is when you burn it, there's no smell whatsoever. Again, it's a composty one. It's not necessarily unpleasant. We'll fill this with green material, with anything, and we'll just get some water and shove it down. It's a big stomach. That's how it really works. There's enzymes that are breaking down the material inside there. And from that they create methane gas. And they create high nutrient water. Now there have been sort of many household biodigestion systems that are coming out. They're about 6 cubic meters, prefabricated systems that cost probably about 40,000 rands. And they're not high gas yielding, but what they are doing is they're breaking down the water, the black water, the effluent water, which is really critical. And so therefore the principles are very much along these lines. This is just a bit more rudimentary. And so from here the water will go through a sand filter, which is what this is, which we've got. Obviously there's high nutrients in here. We've still got about 5 to 7% pathogens, which is your E. coli, etc., coming into here, which then these plant life will take it out. So it'll come into here, it will filtrate down through a slow sand filter. Underneath here, about 1 meter down, there's a hole, and it'll come up here, which this is full of shells like this, and charcoal, which then absorb the last remnants of pathogens. Okay, that's what this one, and the reeds, of course, as well, take out anything. So it's we really have removed as much. I mean, if there's anything left, it's absolute trace elements. The water will gather in here and settle, and then will slowly gravitate down through our trees and our orchards, which are down that side, which is high nutrient water, which you can drink. It'll give you a bit of a stomach ache because it's high in nutrients, but certainly nothing poisonous. And but it's very good for growth of the trees and plants. We've got coffee trees down there and a loquat tree, and we're definitely seeing pronounced growth as to the other trees that we have around here that are not enjoying these high nutrients that we're getting out of here. So ultimately what you'd like to have is, say, 3 or 4 houses together, all the waste leading into a digester, which then would lead into an orchard, oranges or whatever, which would then go to provide food for that house, provide the energy for the gas, as well as, most importantly in my mind, is processing the black water and not getting it into the waterways, which is critical. So we've got our dam over there where the water collects. All right, it's about 120,000 litres of water. We've got our fish inside there as well, which is a source of protein. And we feed the garden with that water as well, which then all slopes back into the dam slowly. From there the water is pumped up through to the storage tank, but it goes through a filtration process first, and then we can put in a solar pump to pump it up to it's a 5,000 litre storage tank. The water is then, there's pipes going around down into the kitchen. From the kitchen it's processed through the food. The food is then processed through our bodies, which is then to the toilet, which then comes down through the digester, through the filtration, back into the gardens, and ultimately back into the dam. And it's a closed cycle, which we have now interrupted. We've taken from it, but now we've also put back the byproduct, which has helped our plant life growth, and it's given us energy. We're obviously going through transition now into winter, so we're getting our celeries going, our beetroots, carrots, things like that, lettuces, which this is quite a warm climate, so the lettuces don't always do that well in the hotter climates. We also do have some shade houses here as well to protect them through the summer. And what we're trying to do here is create a food forest, where we've got our trees going, we've got bananas trees there, citrus trees going, we've got nut trees, avocado trees, pawpaws, as well as guava and coffee. We've got about 350 coffee trees in this space as well, which is got about another 3 years to go before they start producing. And then we've got climbing beans all over the place, which we're getting a huge amount of food from, plus our loofahs, which we eat when they're still young. And then we've got our pigeon peas as well, plus all our herbs and that. And then we go all the way down where we've got our ground covers. This is what we can call an aerated bed. It's off the ground. We've got green material at the very bottom, which is composting, and then we've got which is a long nutrient release bed, which is like a double dug bed, and then above it we've got layers where we've got decomposing materials at various stages, plus cow manure. That's very rich if you look at that. If we look around here, of course, sod's law, we won't find any, but there's worms everywhere as well that are working away. Perhaps if we look in one of the other ones. And then we cover that all up. Right now, because it's winter, we have quite a bit of dew, and this mulch here is holding that water, because we're in drought now, is holding that water on the ground. Plus the kind of growth here, we've got corianders and cresses, which are low onto the ground, and not using up too much of the precious nutrients. But this is where we have problems, where we have invasive plants like this guavadilla, which just comes on and takes over.
But it does produce fruit that you eat.
It produces fruit, but it stops the oxygen from getting to these plants. So this needs to be managed a bit. In this garden here, we've got not just fruit that's for eating, but it's to attract other insects that eat aphids and things like that, like the marigold, which the scent. Some of these invasive pests don't like the smell of, and it attracts other ones which then also eat other pests. So it's a very strong deterrent for an organic garden. There's a certain amount of weeds in here as well. If we look here, these are some weeds growing there. We allow that. We share the garden. We've got nice cloves growing as well, which is really good. On the sides here, we got roots creating networks, holding everything inside here. In this one here, we've got mints, and we've got some gooseberries over there. It smells lovely, if you're into that. And we can also put strawberries in some gardens. At the bottom there, we've got strawberries holding the whole thing together. So we've got garden and garden. Yeah, peanuts here, which are coming good soon. In about 2 weeks' time, we can harvest these. And carrots are coming right as well now. The seeds there, the marigolds are now going to seed, which I'll just distribute. Okay, so this is our dam, which already now we're a month and a half into the dry season, and we're seeing quite a bit of depletion of the water already. But last year we just managed to survive with it, but this year we've got more fish in it, so it's going to be interesting to see. Some of the fish are already at edible size. Just haven't worked out to catch the buggers yet. There's some turtles in here as well, frogs. So it's quite diverse. Turtles take out the small fish to try and keep the population down a bit. You can see that each rice has its own little, each grain of rice. There's a little sheath that exists in. Here's your grain of rice. Our food production has been up about 20 to 30% since we've had the bees here. We were getting some bees still before we put the hive here from the forest, but this hive is about 6-7 months old now and is very, very active. We've already put the second super on the top. So the super is where our honey lives. So the big box at the bottom is the bees' honey, where the queen lives, and then above there is where when that's full, they move up, and that's when we harvest our honey. So the middle one is now full, and the top one is half full now. And what we'll do is, as we go into winter now, the activity will be less and less, and we'll put on one more super, I think, and then we'll harvest the honey probably in the springtime. So now we're not just looking at some kind of one-dimensional garden. We're taking into all different, and we're utilizing all of it, and we're rotating them all the time, and then also protecting them through the winter months. So it's just being conscious, but certainly there's a lot less energy put into this garden as it develops more and more and more, and nature is allowed to do her thing, which is what's really exciting about it. And it truly, I do believe in about 2 years' time, it will be a food forest.
We have planted millions of seeds in minds and hearts. that is sprouting consciousness around what we are doing, what we need to do, and how we can save ourselves from, as my good friend Kumi Naidoo, one of my heroes and the first African head of Greenpeace, says, we are sleepwalking into a disaster of unmitigated proportion, where our children and theirs will pay the price of our greed, our ignorance, and our inability to change. Yet people around the world are realizing this. If William Kamkwamba, a 14-year-old Malawian, can build a working wind turbine, first to power his own house and then eventually his whole village, then surely the rest of us can find some solutions. There's a fabulous book on this young man called The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind, and he's now an MIT student. China leading the way in the manufacture and installation of wind turbines. Nearly 3/4 of all of their clean energy investments are now wind. And in the United States, wind power has been the largest source of renewable electricity for the last several years. But there's also an incredible future for solar. The market is now growing at about 7 times the predicted pace. Did you know that every single hour, enough solar energy hits the Earth to meet the world's energy demands for a year? And here in South Africa, we have all of this available to us. And in North Africa, this ambitious supergrid hopes to take solar energy not just down to sub-Saharan Africa, but into Europe as well. Geothermal power plants, amazing. They harness the heat of the earth to provide clean energy. And here, Iceland's leading the way. In China, every single person has to plant 3 trees every single year. And in India, massive school programs as we do here. The time for action is right now. So folks, whilst most of our governments are MIA and corporate greed continues to rape and pillage planet's resources, and many slumber on unconsciously, can we here at Sustain Our Africa agree? We are the change agents, and together we can make the necessary changes to avoid more suffering so that we can have enough for all forever.
My name is Marcus Asner, and I'm a lawyer in New York. From 2000 to 2009, I was a federal prosecutor in Manhattan, and I prosecuted, among other things, the Arnold Benjes rock lobster and Patagonian toothfish case.
And in your country, do you get a lot of cases that are where the fisheries crimes?
We get some, and yes, we have a pretty robust enforcement network. The Lacey Act is really, I think, I'd like to say it's the envy of the world. And that
can you describe it?
Sure. What it is it makes it a crime. It does a number of things, but what it does is it makes it a crime to import into the United States fish, wildlife, and timber that's been harvested in violation of local law. And that local law can include the law of a foreign country, for example.
And James Benjes was prosecuted under that?
He was prosecuted under the Lacey Act, under conspiracy to violate the Lacey Act, and smuggling, and then smuggling is a substantive violation as well.
Okay. Do you find this is quite effective in preventing corruption in the States?
I wouldn't say it's so much effective in preventing corruption. I think what it is effective in doing is allowing us to use the federal criminal system to help prosecute and investigate instances where people are trying to take advantage of borders to import into areas things that have been harvested in violation of other jurisdictions' laws. And that itself is a very, very powerful tool.
Do you find, as a legal professional, is your main motivation because you enjoy the legality of it, and that, or is your main motivation that in this case you're actually doing something for the planet?
I think I'm probably shallower than all of that. When I was a prosecutor, I just wanted to go get the bad guys. And it didn't really matter to me whether it was a fish case or a narcotics case or a major white-collar fraud. I just liked pulling together the material, investigating the hell out of it, and taking down the bad guys.
Do you worry about what's happening to the planet, or doesn't it come past your door very often?
Yeah, I do worry about it. And look, I mean, I gave you a very shallow answer a moment ago. Of course I worry about it. And you know, one of the nice things about being a prosecutor, particularly in the United States and particularly in the Southern District of New York, is you really fundamentally believe that you wear the white hat and that your job is to protect those who need protection from bad guys. And in the instance of the Vengeance case, we had the added advantage of really setting a precedent that does help protect the planet.
In 1988, that's when we had Bill Molson, the founder of permaculture, who came from Australia. He held a workshop in Botswana on permaculture, and two of our guys, who are now our trustees, went to attend the workshop. And then after the workshop, that's when they turned this farm into a training center. And their main focus was permaculture. Permaculture means permanent agriculture, but it can be defined in many ways. Some say it's an approach to designing system which will give sustainable rewards. Right now, as permaculture is growing up, we are now slowly getting into urban communities. We use natural resources for the production of our crops. Like for instance, for soil improving, we use this type of composting. We just harvest fresh cow dung, and then we put it in this container, we perforate it, and then put the dung in, and then introduce worms. After a period of 3 months, the worms will be doing the decomposition. They will be decomposing the stuff, and then after 3 months it will be ready. Then we take it and then put it in sieves. We mix with sand and then put it. Then after those 3 months, the worms will be in abundance, and we could use them for feeding our poultry, and the extra we can take it for fishing or for fishing or for selling, or we could introduce them in the garden, because they will be in abundance. Nature is working for us.
Okay.
Sure. And then this system is called the container garden. It's ideal for those people who are residing in flats, who doesn't have where to do the cultivation. We just fill in an old sack with compost and a bit of soil. Then you perforate it and then you plant your vegetables. You're home and dry. And if you think of going for a holiday resort somewhere, just take it and then put it at the back of your truck. Then you'll be having fresh vegetables with you. These are herbs. Herbs are used in various ways. Some are used for culinary, some has got medicinal properties, some are used as repellents if planted with vegetables. For instance, we have this one. It's called Nasturtium. Some use it as just a flower, but it has got more properties than just being a flower. We use it to deworm our livestock. It's very, very, very useful. And for human beings, if you have got upset stomach, take the flowers and then chew them, swallow the juice. If you have got eye ailments, you could just take the flowers and then you put them in boiling water, let it cool, and then bath your eyes. It helps a lot. Then we have celery. This one we use it as a repellent again if planted with the brassicas. And apart from that, on medicinal properties, it suppresses BP. One is suffering from BP. If he takes this one regular on his or her diet, it reduces BP.
What is BP?
Blood pressure.
Oh, okay.
Blood pressure.
Celery.
Celery. And then this one is called thyme. Thyme, variegated thyme. This one is used for cooking, in fact. Apart from cooking, it has got many medicinal uses again. You could use it for whooping cough, you could use it for bronchitis, you could use it for headaches, or for boosting up one's immune system. If one, especially those, it could be AIDS victims, if they take this one, it helps them to boost their immune system.
Yeah.
The lifespan will be a little bit prolonged if they take this one regular on their diet. It's very, very useful. Mint is in different varieties. We've got spearmint, we've got black mint, we've got peppermint. Right. It is used for sore throat. If somebody is suffering from sore throat, colds, flu, you could use this one. Just take it as herbal tea. Or if somebody is suffering from dizziness, you could just take a herbal tea of mint. It helps a lot. And then apart from that, if planted under fruit trees, it helps as a repellent of fruit flies. Plus, it's a very good soil binder. Wherever there is a little erosion taking place, if you plant it, it binds up the soil very well. That it reduces soil erosion. Called lemongrass. Lemon. Maybe the word lemongrass comes from that it has got a lemon flavor, and it smoothens the skin. Especially with the ladies, they like this one. Yeah. Acacia trees, they are termed as legumes. We use them in agroforestry, whereby we mix crops and trees. They are nitrogen fixers and they are fodder. They can be used as windbreak. It doesn't shed the field. If planted with the crops tend to do very well. They can even grow very nice under these trees. They are very, very friendly.
Except for the thorns.
Sure. The group is the poor rural farmers who doesn't have enough cash maybe to buy these so-called barbed wires. One could resort to this type of tree. It's called Doviaris scapula. It makes a very good live fence if planted close. It develops thorns, and by so doing it inhibits goats, donkeys to enter in a field. Very, very useful. And apart from being a shield, it produces fruits which could be taken, and they're very, very nice, very rich in vitamin C. For eating. We have here is we have indigenous trees, be it indigenous fruit trees and then trees. And then we've got exotic trees, fruit trees and not fruit trees. And we have passion fruits and we have herbs. But generally, they are for generating income and improving sites within Fambizanai. Wherever we feel like there's bare land, we could just take them and then plant them to improve the site.
How does it improve the site?
Whenever a site is very bare, if you've got a massive downpour of rainfall, erosion takes place. But if you plant trees, the roots helps to bar the runoff and then let the water penetrate into the soil. And you could even introduce grass. You plant trees and then you plant grass. By so doing, erosion is minimized. That's how it improves the site. We plant our crops diversified. The reason being that we are trying to encourage a symbiosis friendship, whereby if you have got a nitrogen fixer, that nitrogen fixer will be fixing nitrogen, thereby benefiting the neighbor. It could be, in this case, it could be spinach. The nitrogen that is left by this bean is taken by the spinach, right? And at the same time, if I've got an outbreak of a certain disease, if that disease attacks spinach, at least you are left with beans. But if you've got just a field of spinach, if that disease comes, it wipes away everything and you are left with nothing. Those are the advantages of diversifying. And at the same time, we encourage farmers to cover the soil. The reason being that if the soil is covered, there is little runoff. And at the same time, there is much percolation. The temperature of the soil remains constant when the soil is covered. There is little evaporation. And at the same time, it decomposes as time goes by. It decomposes, and by so doing, it will be adding fertility into the soil.
So it's just grass then?
You could use grass, you could use dead leaves, you could use live mulch, whatever you have. Because we are saying, it depends with the place you are. If you are in region 1, if you are in region 4, whatever you have there, make use of it. If you don't have even grass or leaves or whatever, you could use even stone mulching. But that one is ideal under fruit trees. You could use stone mulching. We also encourage farmers to dot a few fruit trees in their fields or in their gardens. Right. If you compare the production that you get from one tree and the production that you get on a piece of land planted vegetables, you could see that from a tree you get huge sums of money. So we encourage farmers to dot a few fruit trees into their system for boosting income.
What kind of tree is this one?
It's macadamia nut.
Which one?
That one. Macadamia nut.
That looks like
Very, very expensive. A kg you could buy it at least something like $300 and something dollars. Very, very expensive. Okay, this one is called Leucaena. It's a nitrogen fixer, and at the same time it's fodder. At the same time it's working as hedge here. In permaculture we say at least one element should serve many functions. Right. So apart from just being hedge here, it is barring diseases, the other diseases that travel with wind like blight. So whenever you have a hedge in your garden, that disease could be trapped here and then doesn't get to your vegetables or crops or whatever. At this time of the year there is outbreak of pests. Vegetables doesn't do very well. We are leaving this so that we could feed our livestock because we believe in recycling. We take waste from the garden and then we feed our livestock, and then in return we get manure. We put it on a compost, we reapply it into the garden. So it's sort of a cycle. You could see some of the farmers taking off these old vegetables, throwing them away. That's not a good idea. Recycle it so that it gives benefits again back to that land where you harvested it. And then after that you put a heavy feeder, it could be maize, so that it makes use of the nitrogen that is left by the prior plant.
Yeah.
It's a peach. It's called the elderberry. The flowers are used if somebody is suffering from a heavy flu. You could use those flowers. And the leaves are used for making compost, very rich in nitrogen. And you could use it as hedge again. So hedges are very, very important for stopping wind erosion.
Yeah.
And trees should be shaped in a way that it will become easy for one to harvest. It will become easy for one to spray. So we don't encourage farmers to leave trees growing high up. It will be very difficult for them to harvest. And at the same time, they end up having their kids having fractures because they climb up there, which is very, very much dangerous. So in the necessary course that we give, we train them that they should train their tree. A tree can behave in the way you want if you train it, but if you leave it, it will give you problems. So this is the result of training. The branches are growing sidewise. It's very easy to harvest. You can even harvest when you are standing. You can even spray when you are standing. We make organic remedies. You could spray with hot pepper mixed with a bit of soap, or you could use tephrosia. Tephrosia is one of the most tree that we use here, which is more powerful on whatever pests, be it bagrada bugs, be it grasshoppers, be it what. It's a sweeper. We call it a sweeper, and we use it as a last resort. Sure. So whenever we have an outbreak, we use that one. So we make what we call liquid manure. What we simply do is we find a container and then take fresh cow dung and then put it in a container, add a bit of water, and then leave it to stay for about 2 weeks. And then after 2 weeks, you sort of stir it. Yeah, that's organic farming. And then you take this stuff and then apply it on your crops. You dilute it 1:2 with fresh water, and then you apply it on your crops. But the most powerful one is the one made from chicken droppings. You just harvest the chicken droppings, you put in a sack, and then you put in a drum. You add water. You leave it for 2 weeks again, and then you top dress your crops. But with liquid manure, you go to dilute the one that is made from chicken droppings 1:5 because it's so powerful. If you don't dilute, otherwise everything will be burned. It's very, very powerful.
That's for the flies, hey?
Sure. This is what we call stone mulching. If you've got problems with chickens scratching at the base of a fruit tree, just put stone mulching and you are home and dry. And at the same time, it's acting as a habitat for lizards. Because in organic farming, we also need what we call predators. They help us in reducing the number of pests. So this is a home for lizards, beet snakes. Snakes are very good for controlling mice. So this is the ideal home for our predators. This is prepared for them. If you put fertilizer, yes, you get quick results, but the taste is awful. But if you use manure, it gives a wonderful taste. The taste is just perfect. Remedies on spraying is that whenever you have a customer or you have visitors during the night, you can pick up the leaves because you would have used chilies or hot pepper to do the spraying, which is something eatable. You can just wash that chilies and then you prepare for your customer or for your visitor. But if you use Roga or these synthetic chemicals, if it is 21 days before harvest, you got to wait for those 21 days. But we are having problems because most of the rural farmers, they are money hungry, so they sometimes cheat. Rather than waiting for those 21 days, you could see him waiting for about 15 days and then start harvesting and then selling for the sake of money. But look what will happen. All those people who consume those vegetables will end up having problems just for the sake of money. But if you go organic, spray and then at the same time harvest, no problem.
Fig tree.
It bears fruits and then the fruits turn red when they are ripe. By so doing, they attract birds. And then whenever we have birds in here, birds, rather than feeding on the figs, they could end up picking up pests. It could be butterflies, it could be grasshoppers, they end up picking them. So it's serving main functions here. It's a fruit tree and at the same time it's attracting birds. The birds in return will feed on pests. This is called yarrow. It's a herb. It's called yarrow. Yarrow is a very good plant if mixed with the brassicas because it produces a certain odor which is not liked by pests. So it will be acting as a repellent here. And at the same time, it's a painkiller. If somebody is suffering from anything, you could just take a herbal tea of it and then it eases the pain. It's very good again on bleeding. If somebody is bleeding, you just rub the leaves and then put them on that wound. Automatically the blood will clot. It promotes clotting of the blood. So rather than going to the nearby clinics, we have everything here. We have everything. Maybe when somebody is dying, maybe that's when we could rush that person to the hospital. But otherwise, we would have tried all means by using the natural stuff we have here. Okay, this long grass is called vetiver grass. It is a very good soil binder. Wherever there are gullies or if you want to go on gully reclamation, we advise farmers to use this one because if it establishes very well, the roots can go up to 1.5 meters and it bars runoff very, very, very effectively. And apart from controlling soil erosion, we use it to control moles. Whenever we have moles in a piece of land, you just plant a row of these and then a row of those somewhere there. Then you could kill the moles that are found in between. And then those from there or from wherever, they cannot pass through the rows because of the smell it gives. It's not liked by moles. So it's a repeller of moles. The connection of the ecosystem, they'll be seeing everything. So they prefer using these outdoor classrooms. Closely, we build what you call a chicken tractor. It's just a small wooden thing with a bit of fence so that we keep the chickens at one place and then we put the chickens in. The chickens will scratch, that is picking whatever pest they could find. And at the same time, they'll be dropping their droppings, that is fertilizing the soil, and then weeding, the grazing or the taking of the whatever is growing there. That's fine for us. So after a period of maybe 2 weeks, we move it, put it in another place. We plant something there. It means that place is pest-free, it's manured, and it's weeded or it's cultivated already. And that's how we use chickens in the system of permaculture. Then we come to biogas. We encourage farmers to use these biogases in rural areas as a way of getting fuel. Because after independence, most of the farmers, the rural farmers, they went on a rampage of destroying the environment, having piles and piles of firewood, forgetting that tomorrow they won't have anything to resort on. So we are coming on with this project of biogases, whereby they could use fresh cow dung, feed in, and then get methane gas, then use it for cooking and lighting as well.
So there's methane coming out of that tube?
Yeah, sure, there's methane coming out from that.
And where is it going?
It's going into that house and being used in there for cooking and lighting.
Amazing, huh?
So what's in there?
Methane.
Yeah, but like, how do you get it?
Then we have the inlet there,
Yeah.
where we pour, it could be kitchen leftovers, fresh cow dung, we mix with a bit of water, it forms porridge form, and then we pour it in. When it comes here, there are those anaerobic bacteria or something, which does the decomposition. And then the product that we get is methane gas, and then it's piped into that house.
Wow.
The waste it comes through the outlet. We take it as celery. It could be used as liquid manure. Then we take the waste and then we apply it on crops as liquid manure. So in permaculture we don't throw away anything. We make use of everything. Yeah, sure. Make use of everything. We have cattle. Those are the ones that does the grazing. And then we have pigs. We used to have goats. We just buy them and then fatten them and then sell them as a way of generating income. We harvest seeds from the fields, be it in the garden, be it in the fields, seeds of trees, seeds of vegetables. We bring them in here, we store them there, and then we could sell them to our visitors or customers. And then the extra we could replant it in the garden so that we become self-reliant. We are promoting self-reliance. We have courses that runs for 1 week, and then some runs for 2 weeks. And these bricks are called the SSBs, soil stabilized blocks. They've got a cement element in them, and they can last for a long time. They are very cheap to produce. And they can stay for a long time as long as they don't get wet. But even if they get wet, because of the properties of cement that is inside, they become much stronger. And as I said earlier on, that our target group is the poor rural farmer. If you look at our structures, they are made in a way that even the rural farmer can afford. Look at the ceiling; it's made of reeds, many reeds that are found in rivers. It's not very expensive. The window frames is just planks, but at least the house is presentable. It's not all that bad. It's presentable. So we are encouraging farmers at our level best to use local available resources. Something that doesn't pump out money, because money is easy to get these days. Water that is harvested from the roof is diverted into these pits. These are water harvesting pits. We believe in permaculture that water which is above the ground is destructive, because if it joins forces, it can even sweep away a house. You know, the floods. So we try by all means to encourage farmers to let all runoff sink.
Straight away.
Let it sink, and then if it sinks, it becomes productive, because it will rise up again at night, and it will recharge the water tables. And then by so doing, you'll be having perennial boreholes. But if you leave it flowing, going away, it's lost forever. You'll never get it again.
So these are people's houses here, huh?
Yes, these are people's houses. This is just a model village whereby we are trying to show the farmers how they can set up their homes or their houses. We have the bedroom facing the northern hemisphere. It's because the sun here in Zimbabwe, it follows this direction. So if you build a house this way, it means only one room is going to get enough sunlight. The rest will be dark. So if you build it this way, at least all rooms will get enough sunlight. And at the same time, water that is harvested from there is diverted again into that pit. The whole system is called a pit bed. All the kitchen waste are thrown in there, and then with the help of the water that is harvested from the roof into there, it decomposes quickly. And then after that, it will be manure. Then we retake the manure and then reapply on beds.
How does the water get there? Through the gutters?
Through this drain.
Drain.
Then the water that is harvested from that bedroom goes through the gutters into that tank. Unfortunately, we are not using the tank so far. Then you could use that water for washing your clothes or your plates.
And what about drinking water?
Drinking water, we get it from an electric borehole. It's somewhere there. And then as for soil preparation, we also have this herb here. It's called the stinging nettle. Sting in natural. We use this one to make liquid manure. Earlier on I said you can make liquid manure out of chicken droppings or fresh cow dung. But if you don't have all those, you could resort to this one. This one or Russian camphor. It's very, very rich in potassium, very rich in nitrogen. What you simply do is you harvest the leaves, you put them in a container. Then due to fermentation, it decomposes. The liquid that you get is what we term liquid manure. And you can dilute it with fresh water, 1:1. And then you apply on your crops. Apart from making liquid manure, it's a very good suppressor of sugar diabetes. If somebody is sugar diabetic, you could resort to this one. Just make a herbal tea, and then you put a bit of honey, then you take it. It suppresses the disease. Blood poisoning, it also helps. And again, it's a repellent of snakes. Those who are in Zimbabwe who are living in region 4 or 5, there are lots of snakes. So you can just make a small jura of this one, because snakes doesn't penetrate on it. Maybe it's because of the spikes or whatever. It doesn't like snakes, and you could hardly find one crossing this one. So it's a very good repellent of snakes. We don't believe in plowing, because if you turn up the soil, after 5-6 years the soil becomes exhausted. It quickly becomes exhausted. Maybe what we encourage is we can do plowing maybe on staggering years. Maybe after 3 years you plow, after 3 years you plow. Or on these other years you could practice what we call minimum tillage, where there is little disturbance of the soil, so that the soil will remain intact. Holst building materials. This one is called the rope and washer pump. It's just maybe a simple bore that is a bit advanced. It sucks water from the permanent water table using this rope. This rope has got washers. These washers. And these washers are at every 75 interval. So it rotates into the water table. Then it comes out through this PVC pipe. The volume of the PVC pipe is just similarly the same with the size of the washers. So whenever it sucks water from the water table, that water eventually comes out as you'll be rotating. It's working.
That's pure water, huh?
Yes, that's pure water.
That's absolutely fantastic, man. Jeez, you guys are so clever.
Yeah.
Good day, my name is Brian. I'm the chef at Monkey Valley Resort. Today we're going to do some healthy, pure, organic and free-range food. We're going to be focusing on stuff that is sustainable for the planet. First dish I'm going to do is called pawpaw, roasted pawpaw and walnut relish. Walnuts has got a lot of protein in it. It's also got a lot of sterols and sterolins, which is good for your immune system. So we're going to make something of that. It doesn't require a lot of cooking. Pawpaw is going to go into the pan for like 5 minutes, and the rest of the stuff is quite raw, and it's easy to make and it's quite tasty. So the first thing I'm going to do is the walnut relish. So you just take a couple of walnuts, just chop it up roughly. Let's throw that into the mixing bowl. A little bit of cinnamon, which is quite good for you, also good for the immune system. And then the onion. As far as I know, onion is natural antibiotic, so that's also good. And it's got a bit of a crunch and a nice sharp taste that it gives to the to food in general or the relish. So try to chop the onion nice and fine. That's also going to go in your mixing bowl. Then fresh tomato. We're not going to use the whole tomato, we just want the outside skin. And the skin also contains a lot of vitamins, minerals and so forth, which I don't know all of them. Just chop that up nice and finely. That. Now we're just going to add a little bit of honey, which is very, very good for you. Honey is very, very good. Some honey and then some balsamic vinegar and some fresh coriander. Coriander has got a very earthy sort of smell to it and a very earthy taste, and it's also quite good for your health. Nice green color. Just roughly. Just mix it all in there. And that's more or less the relish finished now. So now we're going to focus on preparing the pawpaw. Just going to peel that. This is quite a big pawpaw. I'm sure you can get smaller pawpaws than this. It's massive. So you just need a little bit of that. I'm just going to cut it there. And then cut it in half. Just going to have to remove these pips. I'm just going to go back into the kitchen, cook this pawpaw, and I'm going to come plate it. Right, so I've gone back, I've gone to the kitchen, cooked the pawpaw. I've just come back, caramelized it, got the natural sugars in the pawpaw to caramelize and give a nice little flavor. I haven't cooked the pawpaw much, so a lot of the nutrients remains in the pawpaw, so it's quite healthy, and it just gives it that little bit of caramelization, that little bit of caramel sort of taste to the pawpaw, which makes the dish quite interesting. So now we're going to plate it. One small little piece of pawpaw is more than enough for a light lunch. Put your pawpaw in the middle of the plate. Then we're going to take some of the relish and just scoop it on top. Just give that a nice stir and just place it nice on top. So you got a soft little pawpaw, sweet little natural fruity flavor, and you got the crunchiness of the nuts. You got tomato in there, you got some honey in there, so everything in here is extremely good for you. There you go guys, natural food, nicely plated, light lunch. Bon appetit.
I'm Ben Margolis with the Global Call to Action Against Poverty, the world's largest anti-poverty movement. And we're here because we're calling on delegates at the conference to really take urgent action on climate change, because we see our constituents all over the world see that today and not tomorrow people are being affected by climate change, people are dying because of the impacts of climate change. And we're hoping that from this conference we get some real agreements from the world's leaders on several measures, specifically on adaptation and on more funding for adaptation above and beyond the 0.7% aid commitments already. Also on deforestation, and really importantly on negotiations around the post-Kyoto Protocol, and making sure that those negotiations, the world's poorest countries' voices are heard, and that the world's richest countries take the responsibility for historic carbon emissions, take that into account when agreeing the post-Kyoto framework tackling climate change. So we really hope that at the end of this meeting we don't just see another talking shop where people come together and they agree that this is a huge problem, but that they actually agree it's a huge problem and put in place some of the measures needed to tackle it really urgently.
Would you prefer that this conference was about cutting out the use of fossil fuel instead of reducing emissions?
It's got to be based on what works for countries all over the world. I think it's very nice to say that we'd like to see a complete cutting of fossil fuels, and I think in an ideal world that is what we'd be looking for. But in reality, for many of the world's poorest countries, their economies rely heavily on fossil fuels still. So for example, in Timor-Leste and East Timor, 82% of GDP to that country is from their oil reserves. So it's very difficult to say at this stage completely cut fossil fuels, because for such a poor country that would have a devastating impact on the world's poor. So I think what's really important is that the world's richest governments really invest money in technology transfer, in renewable energy sources, so that countries like Timor-Leste and others can start to move away from an oil-based economy to a renewable energy economy. What the impact would be if you stop deforestation?
Yes.
How do you mean? You just explain.
Well, at the moment they're just talking about cutting down the emissions from deforestation.
From
In other words, carry on
deforestation.
burning it, carry on getting rid of it, but cut down the amount of smoke that's coming out.
Yeah. The forests provide an absolutely vital source of livelihood for so many of the poorest people in the world. And I was recently in India and working with some forest user groups in India, and also with Nepal with a fabulous organisation called FECA Fund, which is the Federation of Forest Users in Nepal. And actually what they have found they've been able to do is to continue to use the forest as a source of livelihood, but for the community to take ownership of that forest. So actually they are reforesting the area and using it in not just a sustainable way, but actually a way which is reforesting and not deforesting the area. So they're still able to gain the livelihood from that, but they're actually increasing the size of forest at the same time. And what they're finding, especially in Nepal, is as they are regrowing the forest, then the knock-on impact is fabulous in terms of less flooding, in terms of more wood for fuel and so many other things. The big problem with deforestation is in areas where the forest is no longer owned and used by the community, and where large businesses have ownership and access to the land, and then the use of the forest is seen purely as an economic factor. So the use of the forest has to be seen as a benefit for the community which is living with that forest, or as a benefit for the wider community as a whole, as in the global world, which relies on the forest as a carbon sink and so many other things. So actually I think there are ways to continue for the forest to be seen as a livelihood for so many poor communities living in forest areas, but actually to reforest the area at the same time.
It was two pieces of good news that I really liked. Caltech came up, I'm going to just check if it's Caltech, I'm pretty sure it was Caltech, but they came up with a carbon dioxide sequestration device. Now carbon dioxide sequestration sounds fairly technical. All it means is to extract carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and to create something usable, a usable byproduct from it. So these guys took it a whole other level, okay? So they have a device which extracts carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, then under pressure is used to generate electricity. And that's a big breakthrough that's going to happen. Sadly, with all big breakthroughs, it will probably take 5-10 years before we see it. But this is a desktop-sized version, meaning that you can have it like in your house. Every person, you will find maybe in the future, every house is going to be retrofitted with something like this. All the research studies coming through that are related to GMO have caused this, the begin of the decline of GMO, and hopefully inferred the decline of Monsanto. And then there were some really cute stories that came out, and this is very personal for me because I love trees. I love trees. maybe more than is healthy. But they did a study in the UK. It wasn't in the UK actually, it was in France I think, or Belgium. And what they were trying to do is they were trying to see what happens to trees when they absorb carbon dioxide. And obviously, as we know, trees absorb carbon dioxide, they use the carbon to build their body, and they release oxygen. This is very well known. But what they didn't know is what happened to the carbon dioxide. And trees, being the most beautiful, amongst the most beautiful of creatures, turns out that trees actually share the carbon dioxide with each other. So if there is a tree that doesn't have sufficient carbon dioxide, not only will the tree pass it to that tree, so if it wasn't good at generating enough energy for it, it will share it with its tree. But most important is that it's interspecies. So a tree won't only share with a tree from the same species, a tree will actually share with any species requiring carbon. And it just goes to show you how beautiful that thing is. It's beautiful. Because they actually take the, you know, they care. They, by their very design, by their very nature, they care. And then, of course, the big story that you're going to hear a lot about is the reconfiguration of the Tesla coil. Now this is going to be profoundly changing for the world as we know it. The Tesla coil basically, well, inside of any electromagnetic field, they were always able to change matter or move matter, so any matter, within the field by increasing the field or decreasing the field, but never at a great distance. And now they've just reconfigured Tesla's coil based on Tesla's design, and for the first time they're actually able to impact matter at a distance. Now that sounds a little weird, but the implications are extreme. So it's almost like something from the science fiction world, you know, where you're able to point at an object, move a brick. You know, there's those big conspiracy theories about how the pyramids were built and how they managed to move those big blocks. Well, maybe, just maybe, you're looking at a technology that is going to be capable of doing that.
On the local basis, you have what are known as health cities. 100 French cities are part of that network. Of course, 100 cities may not be enough, but it's already a start to prevent additional greenhouse gas emissions by a development of what is known as active mobilities, meaning people walking or cycling to work instead of using cars or public transportation. So you can see it, ladies and gentlemen, we are conducting this struggle on every front. Here in France, but all around Europe. But what is required now is coordination between such efforts worldwide, and we need to have a clear framework. We need to have indicators so as to assess the effectiveness of these measures, but also we need to share tools, and that is the next challenge ahead of us. And after COP21, an ambitious universal binding agreement on health, and I do mean on health, will need to be sealed as well. Madame Neuville.
Thank you very much for addressing this side event. We very much appreciate hearing the perspective of France, in particular the long-term collaboration we are having with you, and especially in the area of environment and health, but in all areas you were just mentioning. So thanks very much. I have now the honor of introducing Dr. Shoshana Jakob, our regional director. And before becoming the regional director, Dr. Jakob served as the founding director of the European Union's European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control, and has held a number of high-profile national and international public health policy positions in the last 3 decades.
Your Serene Highness, Prince Albert, Madame Ségolène Neuville, Secretaries of State, Heads of Agencies, outstanding scientists, dear colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, let me start by repeating what our Director General Margaret Chan said yesterday in a similar event here. She said that climate change is a defining issue of the 21st century. It is a very important issue in the new development agenda, and this is a decisive moment for all of us. Governments and countries of the world are here together to finalize a universal and credible agreement with strong commitments to stop further deterioration of the change of our climate. This is critical to public health. We hope to see a strong people perspective and a public health perspective in this agreement, and of course all the mitigation measures will have very strong co-benefits for health. The fight against climate change is more than just an environmental question. These were the words of the Honorable Minister Fabius, who was opening the conference. It is essential for nourishing our people, water on earth, safeguard biodiversity, protect our health, fight against poverty and massive migration, avoiding war and encourage peace, and giving a chance to development. Climate change has a serious adverse impact on human health, on economic prosperity, on political stability and societal productivity. And Europe is not spared. 70,000 deaths occurred in 12 European countries in 2003 as a result of the heat wave. It was this country which faced the highest consequences. Several thousands of people died within a week. Hospitals and mortuaries were overcrowded. Health professionals had no cure. Some of the dead persons were found days or even weeks later, highlighting some of the social dilemmas of our time. Experts anticipate that more of this is to come. The good news is that this agreement could potentially save many lives worldwide. Investments in low-carbon development, clean renewable energy, and greater climate resilience are also investments in better health. Let me give you a few examples. Measures that reduce air pollution as well as non-CO2 air pollutants such as black carbon can reduce the 7 million deaths globally and the around 600,000 deaths in the WHO European region. A reform of global energy subsidies could reduce carbon dioxide emissions by more than 20%, cut premature air pollution death by more than half, and raise government revenues by nearly $3 trillion. Implementing and enforcing higher standards for vehicle emissions and engine efficiency can reduce emissions of short-lived climate and air pollutants, saving around 2.4 million lives a year, and reduce global warming by about 0.5 degrees Celsius by 2050. Reducing the 4.8% of annual CO2 emissions of the European health institutions could further reduce 15 to 30,000 cases of illness. The good news is that regional initiatives can significantly contribute to global implementation. For example, the European Environment and Health Process provides an ideal platform. It brings together the Ministers of Health and Environment of the 53 European member states. It generated a protocol on water and health, action on transboundary air pollution, and pan-European initiative on transport, environment and health, what we call the PEP, and 3 ministerial declarations calling for further action on climate change and health. More recently, the Working Group on Health and Climate Change was created. As a result, 32 countries examined their vulnerability to climate change-related health threats, and 24 developed already adaptation strategies and plans, including health. Whilst most countries in the region took action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, also reflected in the INDCs, more needs to be done to capitalize on the health co-benefits of energy, transport, buildings, and agriculture. Ladies and gentlemen, let me also reassure you that we in WHO are doing our part.
And we hope that the Paris Agreement is going to give us an even stronger mandate for action together. For our keynote presentation, I have the honor of introducing Professor Sir David King. Sir David was appointed as the UK Foreign Secretary's Special Representative for Climate Change in September 2013, and has previously worked with Prime Ministers Tony Blair and Gordon Brown as the government's Chief Scientific Advisor. He has been instrumental in raising awareness of the need for governments to act on climate change.
It's a privilege to be here with you, and it's a very, very important topic that I'll be addressing. I'm going to start with what I think is Europe's biggest single natural disaster measured in terms of the number of fatalities. And that was the hot summer of 2003. The best estimate of the number of people who lost their lives across Europe in that hot summer is 65 to 70,000. It was an enormous loss of life. It's not recorded as a natural disaster because unlike a tsunami, it happened over months, or a month and a half rather than over a day. But nevertheless, in terms of the number of people who were lost in that disaster, it was enormous. Now, the question I'm addressing here is, what is the impact of climate change on human health? And I'm now going to suggest to you that that disaster was the first direct climate change implicated disaster. So what I'm showing you here is as a function of time going back to the year 1900, the average Central European summer temperature. The black is the measurements, and the red is the theoretical analysis provided by the British Met Office to me in that year 2003, where there's a black line that comes up to a cross. That's that extraordinarily hot summer in 2003. Now, I hope what you can see from that is that it was well in excess of the previous hot summer in Central Europe on record, 1947, that spike in 1947. And then in red, what you see is the Met Office's theoretical model, and that theoretical model from the UK Met Office is essentially from our world analysis of the weather. It's an enormous amount of data, an enormous computer program. It is reinitiated every 6 hours from data gathered from satellites and from commercial aircraft around the world, every 6 hours. And we predict the weather for the world tomorrow, and we also predict climate change for the world in 80 to 100 years' time. So this model includes greenhouse gases. And I simply asked the Met Office to run the model backwards in time, first of all, to see, and I was asking them in 2003, to see to what extent we could trust the calculations. And you'll see that the red indicates that this doesn't give a bad description at all of the change in the Central European average summer temperature going back to the year 1900. What, of course, it doesn't show is that we can predict the weather. The weather is the spikes going up and down over that length of time. The weather prediction is pretty good for tomorrow, and it gets worse and worse as we go forward. And so what I also asked them to do was to reinitiate their program over a 6-week period. And so what you see in the different red curves is the up and down of the weather as predicted, and the overall trend is what we are now calling climate change. Now I asked them to run the program forward in time, and you can then see that, you can then see if you glance across that by 2050, on a not business as usual, a medium to high emission scenario, which we're currently on, we will have reached as an average temperature in Central Europe the same as that extraordinarily hot summer in 2003. And that to me summarizes the enormous risk we are faced with from climate change. Each and every population around the world is fully acclimatized to their historical climate. We would never have had that number of fatalities if people had been acclimatized to the average climate. But that rising background signifies the challenge that we're faced with. When we get an extremely hot summer in 2050 or thereabouts, that'll be an equal spike but sitting above a much higher baseline temperature. There's the challenge. And you will see from this that we need to be, in the shortest possible time, decarbonizing the global economy. And that's what this meeting here in Paris is aiming to do. Now, was that a curious event? Of course we always have extreme weather events. Those upward spikes indicate that in the black curve. But let me just then take you to the next slide, which shows you that hot summer on the left in Central Europe in 2003, and then in July 2010, that awfully hot summer that the Russians around Moscow suffered. And you will see that the Moscow temperature was considerably in excess of that we experienced in Central Europe. And that's the kind of challenge that we are faced with in terms of the human capability to survive going forward. When I was Chief Scientific Advisor, what I had to do was worry about the low probability events, which these extreme events are, with a high impact. And a low probability event might be an event up to 1%, but if the impact was a severe loss of human lives, then we had to act. So for example, H5N1 flu, when it developed in sectors of the avian population, the question arose whether it could transmute into a virus that would become a human-to-human avian flu virus. And since human beings have no protection against H5N1, the outcome would be severe. So I had to get together a group of biologists to first of all give me an indicator of what the percentage chance of that transmutation was. And they said over 10 to 20 years it might be 1%. That's in my danger zone. Then I said to epidemiologists, if this transmutation happens anywhere in the world, how long before it arrives in Britain? And it's amazingly quick because air flights are the best means of transporting a virus of this kind. And after that, what would Britain's population impact be 6 months later? And the answer was between 500,000 and 1 million fatalities, 500,000 to 1 million deaths in just the first 6 months of this flu outbreak. So what I did was then go to a major pharmaceutical company based in Britain. I won't advertise which one. And I simply said, what would it cost to develop a vaccine against the avian H5N1 virus? They gave me a very large number, and I took it to the Prime Minister and the Cabinet, and they agreed right away that we should develop the vaccine and vaccinate the British population up to about 80% of the population, which we did. All right, so now I take climate change, and as I moved into the Foreign Office, decided I would start a new exercise. And that exercise was not to say, what is the average impact from climate change likely to be going into the future, but what are the 1% impacts, and what would the outcome be of those impacts? And what I did was simply put together a team of about 120 political advisors, high-level politicians, people from the security sector, admirals and generals from the United States, India, China and Britain. And we worked for about a year, and we had meetings in each country. And the outcome has been published. It's available on a website. It's a risk assessment of climate change. Now, a risk assessment is taking an insurance/reinsurance approach to climate change, which frankly has never been done before. And this is like saying to somebody, do you have insurance against your house burning down? And everyone would say, of course I do. Do you expect your house to be burnt down? Absolutely not. But the outcome is so severe that you take out an insurance policy. So this is what we were doing here. And so what we did was ask, for example, very high-placed Chinese experts, what is the biggest challenge that your country is faced with? What could climate change throw at you? And they came up with 3 things, and I'm just going to run through our analyses of the risk of each of those occurring going forward in time. And the first was complete failure of the 3 major rice crops in China in 1 year. And if I could have the next slide, we see that, I'm sorry that the yellow curve doesn't come up too well, but these are the different crop varieties. and the temperature rise, local temperature rise, is shown along the bottom curve there, and the local temperature rise above today's level, let me stress. That's not using the pre-industrial level. And you'll see that as the temperature rise even goes to 0.5 degree or 1 degree, the risk of failure of the rice crop in China that would be devastating for the population is already approaching 1%. That's a major risk for a population to take. But let me stress, this is just one impact, because climate change is driving impacts all through together. As the temperature rises to 2-3 degrees centigrade, any biologist would know a rice plant as it flowers is very sensitive to excessive temperature, and if the temperature rises above 34 degrees centigrade, it doesn't produce the rice fruit. Right? So it was a relatively easy calculation to produce this. What this means is food crops around the world are beginning to fail at about the same time because there's a common driver throughout the world. Let me just take the next slide, which gives what is the risk of fatal heat stress? That's what people suffered from in Central Europe. And if we look at this curve, it says, well, if the global average temperature increase is below 4 degrees centigrade, it's below the 1% risk level. And those two disasters I started with, 2003 and 2010, are below that 1% risk level. But they happened. You'll see that as the temperature rises above 4 degrees centigrade, this curve takes off to enormous proportions. It's saying that in any 1 year, we're approaching 60%, 70% chance of this happening. Now, obviously, this is a fatal prediction for many societies. Please look, I'm looking here in blue at northern India, in orange at southeast China, and in green at southeast United States of America. Fatalities for people without air conditioning would be in hundreds of thousands with this sort of situation. One of the biggest risks is, of course, from rising sea levels. The British Isles is a particular situation. Every island nation is faced with this. When there are storms at sea, we have storms inland as well. It means our rivers are swollen and flooded at the same time as we get attacks around the coastline. And the cities, 80% of the world's major cities are based on coastlines, are under severe risk of flooding during those extreme weather events. And what we're showing here is the number of events per 100 years that would occur in Calcutta, Shanghai, and New York. And you can see from the figures showing Calcutta, by the time you get to 100 per 100 years, it's saying Calcutta will flood every single year on average. And this curve rises well above that level. The sea level rises are between 0 and 1 meter on this curve. The very cautious prediction is that we will be approaching 0.4 to 0.5 meters by the end of the century. That's not taking into account feedback effects that are already being observed on Greenland. So as we go forward, actually, it's clear that Calcutta is not a city that can house people as we go forward above sea levels, rises of 0.5 meters or so. We published this, as I said, in June, and some of you may be aware of the very severe floods suffered in Calcutta shortly after we published this paper. If you follow that green curve back in time, you'll see that it's a non-zero probability of happening. The severe floods of cities around the world is happening at the same time as these other challenges. But then let me go back to food production in China and the dependence on rice as a crop. The biggest rice paddy fields in the world are in the Vietnam Delta. And that delta is going to become salinated as sea levels rise, particularly when there are storms at sea. And we will lose the rice crop from the biggest rice crops in the world And that will be a loss that will not be regained. So we're looking at severe challenges to the global economy going forward in time. What is the probability? I was asked to talk about less than 2 degrees centigrade. What's the probability going forward in time that the temperature will stay below 2 degrees centigrade? These different curves are the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, different scenarios going forward. The best case scenario, and we've got to work like hell, if I may say that, to get on the best case scenario, is the dark blue. And you'll see that the dark blue is saying that even as we get to 2030, there is a very good chance that we will exceed a 2 degrees centigrade rise. Even in the best case outcome from this meeting and better behavior going forward in time, we see that that probability is well above that 1% level that I mentioned. Let me have the next slide, because then it says what the probability of exceeding 4 degrees centigrade is, and you'll see that beyond the middle of this century, on a business as usual, it's going to go above 4 degrees. The dark blue is that best behavior curve. We've actually got a pretty good chance of staying below 4 degrees as we move forward in time. We're hoping that we will stay on the pale blue curve as we move forward from this meeting, or the dark blue. But let me just remind you, we cannot predict that that'll be certain to keep us even below that 4 degree level, which I'm saying is going to be devastating. The conclusion from the University College London Lancet Commission report, that joint study, which came out about the same time as our risk and assessment analysis, is shown here. Climate change is the greatest global health threat of the 21st century. I hope you understand. I believe that climate change is a threat to our global civilization. Our economic system cannot survive the kind of threats we've understood from this analysis. Thank you very much.
I think it brings home once again why we're here today, what we need to do when we go back, and the disastrous consequences if we do not carbonize our economy in the shortest time possible.
Our focus is on wildlife traders. That is our niche. We do terrestrial and marine species. I've been in traffic for 15 plus years now, and for the majority of that time my work has been focused on marine resource trade. I'm based in Cape Town, so for much of that time, and collaborated really quite extensively, not only with DAF, as you would have heard from Bernie. That wasn't a setup. Bernie referring to traffic. We've had the most wonderful collaboration with Bernie and many of his colleagues over the last 10 or more years. Just last week, we ran a fisheries data analysis training program with about 20 DAF officials, and really pleased to see quite a number of them are at the symposium as well. The collaboration mentioned a number of times already, and ours is a good example of the way in which an NGO can work with government agencies. So, a very simple presentation really for me today. I'm going to be talking about the challenges that are faced with seafood trade, focusing on international trade. I won't be looking at domestic trade and those challenges. I'll be drawing drawing predominantly on examples from South Africa. I'm going to be talking, just to warn you, I'll be talking again about abalone and rock lobster. I know Bernie covered them, but they really are, I know those situations, those trade issues well, and in a way they're kind of like the poster child of fish crime and related trade. They are such strong, unfortunately, South Africa, very damaging examples of fish crime. And then at the end I'll discuss some solutions for addressing the challenges. Okay, so this is a sort of standard trade chain. You've got fish at sea being caught from boat to plate, and you have a whole lot of controls right through that system from the time it's landed. The first point of sale buyer, you've got the processor, the trader, get exported, imported then, goes into the retail restaurant system and is bought by a consumer and is eaten. And you've got systems at each point in that trade chain for monitoring these controls, and a variety of agencies with a mandate for that enforcement. Now, I think arguably the strongest measures and the most expensive measures are those that take place at sea. So you've got your observers, you've got VMS, AIS, at sea patrols, and then at landing as well, you've got fisheries control officers monitoring discharges. And I think probably justifiably so that you want to expend a lot of effort, compliance effort at sea. You want to keep the resource in the sea at sustainable levels. Once it's been illegally harvested, the stock has been impacted. So I think justifiably, but it's the very expensive end of compliance. And right through this trade chain, every single opportunity there is an opportunity to disrupt. Wherever you've got a control measure that can be enforced, you have an opportunity to disrupt. And I think if we just reflect on that pyramid that Eve showed yesterday, the more opportunities for disrupting illegal catch and trade, I think the higher we can get in that pyramid and the just attitudes and behavior. So you also have fisheries control officers, enforcement officials playing a role through the trade chain. They will check, for instance, processing establishments, check invoices, permits, and so on at various stages. In some cases, but not always, you'll have compliance officials playing a role at border posts, imports, so monitoring import and export of seafood. But that's not always the case. That's often where customs plays that predominant role. And as we know, there's not enough interaction between customs and fisheries. There's an assumption, I think, that by fisheries that, well, the trade is largely international trade. That's being largely regulated by customs, although it is within their mandate. And then, the thing about all those trade-related activities is that at every point in that trade chain, there's a permit, and a permit's got information on it. There's a lot of data that's being collected right through that period. And my experience is that that data is not being analyzed sufficiently. I think we have far more of a focus on analyzing the at-sea data, the catch data, the VMS data, the observer data. There's a huge untapped data resource that's linked to the trade chain. Not enough cross-referencing, not enough comparative analysis. I think from a compliance point of view, this trade chain as well, it provides enormous challenges. Those challenges are also opportunities, of course. But you've got seafood being traded in a processed form. It could be dried, it could be filleted, frozen. If it's in a container, as Bernie showed, you're facing a huge task. So I'm going to talk through a couple of examples that just highlight the challenges, reflecting again as well on the potential for improved trade data analysis and how that can contribute to tackling fish crime. So this is a photo that I took about 4 years ago, I guess, in Dubai, UAE, and these are sharks that came across from Oman. There were probably about 4 or 5 freezer trucks that came over, and apparently these trips are happening almost daily. They're brought at night to the night market, to the fish market in Dubai, and they then bought and finned. I don't know what happens to the meat. I wasn't there long enough to watch the transaction and any processing, but the main market here is for the fins. And it's quite a gruesome photo, but really just this whole long wharf, just all these big dead sharks lined up. Most of them were big-eyed thresher sharks, which catch is prohibited by IOTC for IOTC member states and cooperating non-contracting parties. And Oman's a member of IOTC. I don't know whether the vessels were caught by an Oman flag vessel, but they came from Oman. So at some point, the catch wasn't in compliance with an RFMO provision. Now they're in trade though. And from this point onwards, the trade will be legal. There's no need for anything to be hidden. When you miss declaration to take place, the trade can be completely legal. Then we have Smooth, I think it's a Smooth hammerhead, which at the time was not listed on CITES, but it now is, and it requires CITES trade documentation. And for a compliance official at each point in this, to be able to firstly identify the shark to a species level and know, oh, this is a hammerhead shark, of a species that's covered by CITES, or that species is not meant to be caught in terms of an RFMO. What does the documentation look like? What should the species look like? Once the fins have been cut off now, the fins have to be identified to a species level. So there are significant challenges for trade-related compliance enforcement. So Bernie spoke this morning about abalone poaching and trade, and really it provides one of the most dramatic examples of fisheries crime. I really feel almost perhaps all wildlife crime on the African continent. I know we've faced at the moment a real crisis with rhino poaching, with elephant poaching. But this is a crisis of its own. If not having as much of an impact on the species, the social impacts are devastating. It's syndicated crime that's been involved, drugs, local gangs, corruption, you name it. It's all bundled in here. This graph shows abalone poaching estimates over the last, since 2000, so 15 years. And we've developed this looking at imports of abalone into the key importing countries, and then comparing that with what could be legally produced in South Africa through mariculture and through the legal fishery, and doing a simple calculation of what could be legally produced and what's actually being imported into the key markets. And the difference, of course, is the poached abalone. And we can do this quite accurately, working closely with the department. If you look at the blue bars are the poaching estimates. The orange part of that, of each graph, the stacked bars, is the TAC, the total. So that's the annual quota for abalone. You can see how it's just gone down over the years. It's been reduced because of the heavy impact on the resource from poaching. And now in 2014, the legal catch probably represents conservatively, I think, maybe 3% of what comes out of the water legally. Everything else, you can imagine, 3% of what is being taken out of the water is taken out legally. More than 95% is being poached. And this hasn't just been going on for 1 or 2 years. This is not boom and bust. It's been going on for decades, really. So there's a real crisis here. So unfortunately, though, this is just not, this sort of analysis can be useful because it can show you the volume, the extent of the crime that you're dealing with, but it's not really something that many customs agencies actually that they do. This is also based on an analysis of trade data, but in this case we're looking at values. And what's interesting about this graph, why I'm showing you this graph, is because it shows that this is just for Hong Kong, it's just for dried abalone, but it's showing that abalone is being imported not just from South Africa, but from Namibia, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Zambia, and Kenya. Now, our species is an endemic species. There's a very small abalone farm in Namibia. The bottom line is that South Africa really should be the only country that's exporting any sizable quantities of abalone, and a small amount from Namibia. There's no processing outside of South Africa. Anything that's coming from those other countries is guaranteed to be poached abalone. Some of them are landlocked, Zimbabwe, Zambia, landlocked countries. So important information for compliance to know the trade routes, so then that also gives information on focusing on specific border posts, working with counterparts in those countries to make them aware of this dynamic, seeing what possible legal processes could be developed for tackling trade once it's left the country. We also don't know if it's actually always all physically leaving the country. One possibility could be that it's going to the bonded warehouse, let's say at Tambo International Airport up in Johannesburg. It never leaves the country, but forged permits are produced that show that it's in the bonded warehouse and it's come through Zambia. It's now caught illegally. Once it's in the bonded warehouse with the forged documents, it's now legally in trade. And I'm not sure if this is what's happening. It's a possibility, but it could be apparently a way then for organized crime to get forex into countries where they have operations. If they need to get money into Zambia, they can show that there's a trade with Zambian product. They need to pay the exporter in Zambia. Now that facilitates money laundering. These sorts of things, this sort of information, can be really useful in generating interest from other agencies. Financial Intelligence Center in this country and equivalent agencies in other countries that are trying to follow the money that's linked to organized crime. This sort of information I know is useful and valuable to them. I'd also just like you to look, probably can't see the numbers, especially at the back, but this is a value related graph. So we're looking at most years between, let's say, $30 and $40 million in value, of which the majority of that would be illegal. Now, if you convert that into South African rands, just for the dried abalone, it's a lot of money. It's a good way to get Treasury interested, to motivate for increased budgets for compliance. They're not going to be that interested in 2,000 tons of poached abalone being exported illegally, but they're going to be very interested if you tell them that they're losing, up to R1 billion a year in illegally. There's loss of revenue and the other impacts. I'll just have to move on a bit. So I will just briefly explain how is this possible. But essentially, what is happening is that the product is being caught illegally, and through the trade system, it's being turned into a legal product. This is what happened with the Bengas case as well. What happens with abalone. The big risk is in the country where you're exporting the product. That's where most of the enforcement is. That's where the concern is. So you pack your abalone, your lobster, whatever it is, into a container with whatever else it might be, polypropylene balls, duvets, plastic bags, you name it, and you misdeclare it. It could be car spares, bathroom accessories, computers, it doesn't matter. On the import side, the importing authorities aren't interested in your export permit. They don't want to know about the export permit. You complete the import permit, and there's no risk of misdeclaration. You quite openly declare importing duvets and abalone in a container. There's no risk, there's no national legislation that prevents you or could in any way address it. And so this is how an illegal product is turned into a legal product. This is a real challenge. This is an example. This is actually the case that Bernie was talking about, where you had sardines and abalone packed into the same container, exported as sardines. I'm not sure what would have happened on the import side because they got the container turned back, but if they'd been sensible, they would have declared it as abalone and sardines together in a container so as not to risk misdeclaration. Very briefly then, I only have a few minutes left. This is the Bengas case as well. So what I was interested, I looked back in about 2012 to see, well, what did the trade data look like if we compared what South Africa exported to the US at the time when Bengas was operating with what the US reported as imports? And as expected, there's a big difference. There's that big bubble, Bengas bubble there. And that's the difference. The difference is really what was being poached and exported illegally, because there was no risk on the import side of declaring it as abalone. What was interesting in subsequent years, though, is that it hasn't gone away. And Bernie said, can't give any details, but there are ongoing investigations into illegal lobster poaching and trade. And my thinking was, as Bernie said, if they hadn't had that informant telling them about the Benga's trade to the US, it could have gone on for years. If someone had been doing data analysis in 98, 99 and seen this big difference, maybe they would have alerted and said, look, you've got to look particularly at consignments that are going out to the US. We think that's where our poached abalone is going, lobster. To summarize the challenges, the international trade system makes it too easy to order illegally caught fish. It's very difficult to change the system. The HS, the RMS system, the standardized system, often doesn't contain sufficient detail of fish products, frozen fish other or something. It doesn't tell you that it's a hammerhead shark. But sometimes import data can provide that level of detail, which it does, for instance, with abalone. So it's about understanding the systems. Insufficient interagency cooperation, especially between customs and fisheries. That's both within a country, but also between countries. The capacity to deal with these massive volumes of fish products in international trade makes inspection very challenging. Numerous trade documents, knowledge of the requirements, the confidence to know exactly what is required with a trade situation, what document is needed, what should be written on that document, how does that match up with what's in the box. Identification of especially processed fish products and trade, and then corruption, which has been mentioned a couple of times this morning already. Solutions. This is a big thing for me. And analysis of trade data. Quite a few of you here today have heard me. I've been banging this drum for many years, but I think we know by now that this can add value to compliance efforts. There's so much data out there, and we live in an age where access to that data is easy. There's software applications that can bring this disparate data together, do the analysis, do the cross-referencing, and make us more informed of people tackling fish crime about what happens to that product after it's left the sea, after it's hit the wharf. Somehow it ends up being legal on a plate in a restaurant, in a retail outlet somewhere across the world. Explore to deal with the problem with import and export permits. See what is possible working within the WCO and the HS system to move towards electronic permitting, to move towards a single import-export permit. Something needs to be done to address a system that is not helping us, is working against us. Continuous efforts, like with this symposium, to build interagency collaboration. And then we have a real opportunity to actively engage. We've got some fantastic international institutions. We heard yesterday from UNODC, there's the WCO, Interpol. We heard from Interpol as well yesterday, CITES, to build capacity and to obtain and share information for future collaboration. And my last slide, corruption, tackle corruption. Building knowledge on capacity on trade document requirements, the assessment of those documents, validation of those documents, continuous capacity building really, and the same for species identification. And
the actual molecules of hydrogen and oxygen themselves, they remain intact, but they are incredibly efficient as a solvent to carry away and move